The last box was a bastard. Not just heavy, but awkward, its weight shifting with every pained step I took from the entryway into the cavernous, empty living room. The tape groaned under the strain. My t-shirt was pasted to my back with sweat, and the air inside apartment 4A tasted of new paint and old dust. I swore under my breath a low, tired curse aimed at the box, the moving company, and my own stupid decision to pack every book I owned into one cardboard sarcophagus. I let it drop the last few inches with a percussive thump that echoed off the bare walls. My back screamed in protest. I stood there, hands on my hips, breathing hard, just listening to my own pulse thumping in my ears. This was it. Home. That's when I heard it. Tap. Tap. It was so soft I almost missed it. A delicate, hesitant sound against the heavy wood of the front door. I froze, my ragged breathing catching in my throat. My first thought was irritation. Great. The building manager, probably here to deliver a welcome packet and a list of 100 rules I was already breaking. I'd met him once. A guy with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The last thing I wanted right now was a forced, friendly chat. I wiped a sweaty hand on my jeans and trudged toward the door, my feet scuffing against the dusty hardwood floor. I swung the door open. The hallway was empty. Utterly, completely empty. The beige walls stretched down a long corridor, punctuated by the dark rectangles of other apartment doors. The motion sensor light directly overhead hadn't even flickered on, bathing the space in a dim, orange-hued gloom from the fixture further down the hall. No clipboard guy. No one. A gust of stale, air-conditioned air drifted in, smelling faintly of old carpet and pine sol. I stuck my head out, looking left, then right. Nothing but silence. I shrugged, a fresh wave of annoyance washing over me. Probably some kid playing a prank. Ding-dong ditch, apartment building style. I was about to slam the door shut and get back to the misery of unpacking when my eyes caught it. On the bristly, dark gray welcome mat that was the first thing I put down, sat a small, perfect-looking blueberry muffin. It was still in its ruffled paper cup, placed dead center on the mat. There was no plate, no napkin, no note. Just the muffin. I stared at it for a long second. I bent down, my knees cracking a complaint. My fingers hovered over it for a moment before I touched its domed top. It was still warm, not just room temperature, but genuinely warm, as if it had come out of an oven just minutes ago. A faint, sweet, buttery scent rose from it. What the hell? I picked it up. It felt impossibly light. My brain scrambled for an explanation. A welcome gift? But who would just leave it on the mat and run away? And why no note? This wasn't a friendly gesture. It was a weird one. Hello? I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet hallway. Is anyone there? The only answer was the low hum of the building's ventilation system. The silence settled back in, thick and heavy. I looked across the hall at the door to apartment 4B. The realtor had made a point of telling me it was vacant, had been for almost a year after some serious water damage from the unit above. They were still tied up with insurance, she'd said, so it wasn't them. The apartments on either side of me? Maybe. But the speed of it, from a warm oven down the hall, placed on my mat and vanished, all within the span of 30 seconds? It didn't add up. I stood there in my doorway holding the mystery muffin, a growing sense of unease prickling at the back of my neck. This was a city of 8 million people. Weird was the baseline. But this felt different. It was too quiet. Too specific. My gaze drifted back to the door of 4B. A dark, unmarked slab of wood, identical to my own. A small brass peephole was set in its center. A single, unblinking eye. Curiosity, sharp and stupid, overrode my unease. I needed to know. I had to confirm that the apartment was empty, that I wasn't just imagining the silence, the emptiness. Before I could talk myself out of it, I stepped out into the hall, my own door swinging shut behind me. The latch didn't catch, leaving a small gap. I crossed the worn, patterned carpet in 3 quick strides. The air felt colder over here. I leaned in, putting my eye to the peephole of 4B. I expected to see darkness, or maybe the faint outline of a room from light bleeding under a distant window. For a split second, I did. I saw a blurry, dark space. Then it snapped to absolute black. Click. It wasn't a slow fade. It was instant. A circle of dim light one moment, a void of perfect, impenetrable black the next. As if a lens cap had been slammed on from the inside. Or as if an eye had just pressed itself against the other side of the glass, its pupil eclipsing my entire world. I flinched back so hard I stumbled, my heel catching on the edge of the carpet. A strangled gasp escaped my lips. I landed hard against my own door, the wood jolting against my spine. The muffin, still clutched in my hand, was now crushed, its soft cake and sticky blueberries smearing my palm. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs. I scrambled for the doorknob, fumbling, my hands slick with muffin guts. I didn't look back at 4B, I couldn't. I threw myself inside my apartment, slamming the door shut. The sound was a cannon blast in the quiet. My hand, shaking violently, shot the deadbolt home. A loud, metallic thunk. Then I fumbled with the chain, sliding the brass bolt into its channel. Click-clack. Locked. Safe. But the feeling of safety didn't come. My back was pressed hard against the door, as if I could physically keep whatever was out there from getting in. My breaths came in short, sharp pants. What was that? A trick of the light? A loose piece inside the peephole? My rational mind was desperately throwing out explanations, but my primal brain wasn't buying any of it. It screamed one word, over and over. Someone is in there. I held my breath, straining to listen. I pressed my ear against the cool wood of my own front door, my pulse pounding a frantic rhythm against my eardrum. I heard nothing. Just the far-off, muffled sound of traffic from the street 4 floors below, the hum of my own empty refrigerator. I was being ridiculous. I was tired from the move, strung out on caffeine and physical exhaustion. My mind was playing tricks on me. I started to pull away, to laugh at my own jumpiness. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a sound from the hallway, it was a sound from the door, right against my ear, as if its source was on the other side of the wood, mouth pressed to the other side. A whisper. So faint it was like the rustle of a dead leaf skittering across pavement. A strand of sound, thin and dry. Welcome, neighbor. I recoiled from the door as if it were white hot. A raw, animal noise tore out of my throat as I staggered backward, tripping over the very same box of books I had cursed just minutes earlier. I fell hard, my head cracking against the floorboards. Pain flared, but it was distant, completely drowned out by the tidal wave of pure terror that washed over me. I lay there on the floor, crab-walking backward, my eyes locked on the door. The deadbolt was thrown. The chain was secured. Nothing could get in. Nothing. But the voice, it had been right there. It wasn't a shout. It was intimate, confiding, the kind of whisper you share with someone in the dark. My mind was a screaming chaos. I fought for control, for a single rational thought to cling to. It was the vents. It had to be the vents. Sound travels in weird ways in old buildings. Someone in another apartment was welcoming their own neighbor. It was a coincidence. A freak acoustic anomaly. It had to be. I pushed myself up, my body trembling. My hand was still sticky with the ruined muffin. The sight of it sent a fresh jolt of revulsion through me. It felt contaminated. Poisoned. I lurched into the small kitchen area, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I ripped the plastic trash bag out from under the sink, my fingers fumbling with the drawstring. I threw the crushed muffin into the dark maw of the bag like I was disposing of a biohazard, then shoved the bag back into its can, slamming the lid down. There. It was gone. The evidence of the strangeness was gone. I could forget it ever happened. I was just tired. Overwrought. Alone. In a new city. I leaned against the counter, closing my eyes, forcing my breathing to slow down. In. Out. In. Out. Just a bad moment. A head trip. When my heart had slowed from a sprint to a frantic gallop, I opened my eyes. I turned around, my gaze falling on the front door, the solid, reassuring barrier between me and the hallway. And my blood ran cold. There, on the smooth, painted white surface of the door, on my side of the door, was a mark. It wasn't there before. I would have seen it. It was a fresh scratch, gouged deep into the wood, the raw, pale pine showing through the white paint. The edges were splintered, sharp. It looked as if it had been carved by something sharp, something hard. It looked like it had been carved with a fingernail. It wasn't a random scratch. It was a letter. The start of a word. A single, jagged, capital H. Below it, as if the carver had been interrupted, was the beginning of another downward stroke. H-E-L-L-O. The whisper came from outside. The mark was on the inside. I stood frozen in the middle of my new living room, staring at the scarred paint. I was locked in, and it was in here with me. Sleep didn't come. Not real sleep, anyway. I drifted in a gray, shallow state, jerking awake at every creak of the old building settling, every distant siren that bled through the walls. Each time, my eyes snapped open, locking on the front door, expecting to see the deadbolt sliding back on its own. The scratch was still there. That single, jagged letter H, a scar on my new home, a promise of a word I didn't want to see finished. The sun rising felt less like a new day, and more like a temporary ceasefire. My body ached from the fall, from the move, from the tension that had knotted every muscle into a tight, useless cord. I needed caffeine. The thought was a lifeline. A simple, normal act. Make coffee. Drink coffee. Pretend last night was a stress-induced hallucination, a product of exhaustion and a crushed blueberry muffin. The kitchen was a mess of half-unpacked boxes, but the coffee maker was on the counter, a chrome and black sentinel of civilization. I scooped grounds into a filter, filled the reservoir, and flicked the switch. The machine hissed to life, a comforting, domestic sound in the hostile silence. As the dark liquid began to drip into the glass carafe, its bitter, rich smell filling the air, I leaned against the counter and stared out the large living room window. It looked directly across a narrow, unappealing air shaft to the window of the opposite apartment. 4B. The source of the whisper, the source of the black eye in the peephole. I stared at its dark, lifeless pane of glass, my jaw tight. I was waiting for something, expecting something. A flicker of movement. A face. Anything. Nothing. Just my own strained reflection looking back at me. Then, a movement. Not in the window directly opposite, but one floor down. Apartment 3B. My eyes drifted downward, and there she was. A young woman stood at her window looking up at me. She was pale, with long, dark hair that cascaded over the shoulders of a simple, old-fashioned floral dress. Her face was heart-shaped, her eyes large and dark. There was a fragile, almost translucent quality to her skin in the flat morning light. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. Instead, a small, hesitant smile touched her lips. She raised a hand in a slow, gentle wave. My first reaction was a jolt of pure, undiluted relief. A person. A normal person. A neighbor. Not a whisper in the dark or a scratch on the door. A girl in a floral dress, smiling. My own hand came up, almost of its own accord, and I gave a weak, shaky wave back. The tension in my shoulders eased a fraction of a degree. Maybe I wasn't completely alone in this concrete tomb. Maybe last night was just a nightmare. She saw the mug in my other hand. Her smile widened. She pointed a delicate finger at my coffee mug, then tapped her own nose, and nodded enthusiastically. The gesture was universal, unmistakable. That coffee smells good. The tiny bit of warmth I'd felt evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp spike of ice in my veins. My hand stopped. The mug hovered in midair. My brain went into overdrive, scrambling, replaying the gesture. Point. Tap. Nod. How? The realtor had made a big deal about it, a selling point for a light sleeper like me. The windows were new, double-paned, argon-filled monstrosities designed to keep the city out. They were sealed shut, a shield against the noise and the grime. My window was closed. I was certain hers had to be too. Nobody left their windows open in this city unless they wanted their apartment to smell like exhaust fumes and hot garbage. There was no way she could smell my coffee. No way. Not across an 20-foot air shaft through 2 panes of thick, soundproof glass. It was impossible. My smile dissolved. I stared at her, my heart beginning a low, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. Her own smile faltered, her expression shifting to one of confusion, then concern. She tilted her head, her brow furrowed, as if asking what was wrong. The normalcy of her expression was a stark, screaming contradiction to the impossibility of what had just happened. I needed to know. I had to get out of my apartment, away from the marked door, and confirm that there was another living, breathing human being in this building. I put the coffee mug down on the counter with a loud clatter. I didn't look back at her. I turned and walked to the front door, my steps quick and determined. The fear from last night was still there. A cold knot in my stomach, but now it was mixed with a desperate, frantic need for answers. I pulled the door open and stepped into the hallway. The air was cool and still. The patterned carpet seemed to swallow the sound of my footsteps. I looked down the staircase. One flight. That's all it was. I took the stairs two at a time, my hand gripping the cool metal railing. The door to 3B was identical to mine, and 4B's, a slab of cheap wood, painted a boring, institutional beige. A small brass 3B was screwed into the center. I stood before it, my breath held tight in my chest, my knuckles hovered over the wood. This was it. This would prove it. She would open the door, maybe apologize for being weird, maybe invite me in for a cup of her own coffee. My reality would stitch itself back together. I knocked. 3 sharp raps. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was loud in the stairwell. I waited and waited. The silence that answered wasn't empty. It was solid. A wall. I could hear the faint hum of the building's electricity, the distant rumble of the subway deep underground. Nothing else. Hello? My voice was tight, louder than I intended. I'm the new guy, from 4A. I just saw you at the window? More silence. Deep, profound, absolute. It pressed in on me. I leaned closer, putting my ear to the door. I heard nothing. Not a TV, not a footstep, not a single breath. It was the same dead silence I'd felt from outside 4B. Panic began to bubble up, hot and acidic, in my throat. What the hell was going on? Was this a joke? A game? I was about to knock again, harder this time, when a noise from below made me flinch. A door creaked open on the second floor, followed by the shuffling sound of slippers on linoleum. A moment later, an old woman started making her way up the stairs. She was bird-like and tiny, wrapped in a faded pink housecoat, her gray hair pulled into a tight, severe bun. She carried a small, overflowing bag of garbage. Her sharp eyes, magnified by thick glasses, fixed on me as she climbed. She stopped on the landing, one step below me, and looked from my face to the door of 3B, then back again. A frown line deepened between her brows. "Can I help you, son?" Her voice was raspy, laced with the kind of suspicion only a long-term city dweller could perfect. "Oh, hi, I was trying to meet my neighbor." I gestured lamely at the door. "In 3B. I saw her a minute ago." The woman's expression didn't change. She adjusted her grip on the trash bag. "Neighbor?" she repeated, the words sounding foreign on her tongue. "There's no one in 3B. "What?" "No, that's not right. I just saw her. A young woman, dark hair, wearing a—" "Son," she cut me off, her tone flat, leaving no room for argument. "I've lived in this building for 32 years. I'm the floor captain. I know who comes and goes. The Millers moved out of 3B 7 months ago, broke their lease, said the place gave them the creeps. It's been empty ever since. The landlord's been trying to rent it out for half a year. The floor beneath me felt unstable. My reality was cracking. But I saw her," I insisted, my voice rising. "She was right there, in the window. She waved at me." The old woman took a half step back, her eyes narrowing. She was looking at me now like I was the problem, like I was the unhinged one. "Listen," she said, her voice dropping to a low conspiratorial hush. "This is an old building. You hear things, you see shadows. You're new. You're not used to it yet. Take my advice. Just keep to yourself. Mind your own business." Her certainty was a physical force. It was absolute, unwavering. She wasn't lying, which meant I was losing my mind. The whisper, the scratch, the girl in the window. It was all in my head. A cascade of psychotic breaks brought on by the stress of a move. "Right," I mumbled, the air knocked out of my lungs. Yeah, okay, sorry to bother you. She gave a curt, final nod, her eyes still locked on me, and then shuffled past me up the stairs toward the incinerator chute at the end of the hall. I didn't watch her go. I just stood there, staring at the blank face of door 3B. The world had tilted on its axis. Nothing made sense. My own mind was a hostile, unfamiliar territory. I turned and walked back to my apartment in a daze. The walk up the single flight of stairs felt like scaling a mountain. My own door, 4A, seemed menacing. I just wanted to get inside, lock it, and hide. I stepped into my apartment and pushed the door shut behind me. It swung closed with a soft click. My gaze fell to the floor, and my blood turned to ice. It wasn't there before. I would have stepped on it. I would have felt it, slipped under the door. Sometime in the few minutes I was gone was a small piece of paper. It was folded into a tiny, tight square, crammed into the thin space between the bottom of the door and the hardwood floor. My breath hitched. My hand trembled as I bent down and picked it up. The paper was thin, flimsy, torn from a notepad. I unfolded it. 2 lines were scrawled on it in a shaky, desperate-looking script. The ink was slightly smeared, as if written in a hurry. Don't trust them. My name is Lan. The paper felt flimsy in my grip, a tiny square of defiance against the solid weight of the locked door. I unfolded it again, my thumb smudging the already smeared ink. Don't trust them. My name is Lan? Them? Who the hell was them? The old bat from downstairs? The realtor who sold me this box? The entire population of New York City? I walked into the living room, the bare floorboards echoing my steps. I read the words a third, a fourth time. The script was shaky, all sharp angles and hurried loops, like it was written by a hand that was trembling. My name is Lan. The girl from the window. The girl who wasn't there. This had to be a joke. A stupid, elaborate prank. It's what you do to the new guy in the building. Scare him a little. Some bored teenagers, maybe. They see me move in, alone. An easy mark. They get the old lady in on it, slip a note under the door while I'm talking to her. It was the only thing that made sense. The only thing that kept the floor from tilting underneath my feet. Kids, I muttered, the words sounding hollow in the empty room. Fucking kids. I went into the kitchen and tossed the note onto the counter, right next to the coffee maker. The machine was cold now, a forgotten promise of a normal morning. I'd deal with the note later. Throw it out, forget about it. This whole building was giving me a headache. The scratch on the door, the whispers, the phantom neighbor. I wasn't going to let a piece of paper add to the pile of crazy. My reflection in the dark kitchen window looked wild. Eyes wide, hair a mess. The old woman's words came back to me. You're new. You're not used to it yet. Maybe she was right. Stress. Exhaustion. My brain was playing tricks on me. I needed to clear my head. Wash this whole morning off my face. The bathroom felt like a cell. White tile, white porcelain, a single buzzing fluorescent light overhead that flickered erratically. I leaned over the sink, turned on the cold tap, and splashed water on my face. It was a shock, sharp and biting. I did it again, scrubbing at my eyes, trying to force away the image of the girl in the floral dress and her impossible smile. I looked up at my reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. Water dripped from my chin. My face was pale, my eyes bloodshot. Behind me, the shower curtain hung motionless. For a second, a stupid, primal part of my brain expected to see it move. It didn't. I was alone. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of rust and old plumbing. Okay. It's okay. It's just an old building. That's all. Just an old building. I turned off the light and walked back out. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. The hum of the city outside seemed to have faded, leaving a thick, waiting silence in its place. My eyes went straight to the kitchen counter, to the spot where I had left the note. It was gone. My heart gave a hard, painful jolt. No, I put it right there. Right next to the coffee maker. I was sure of it. I walked over, my steps slow, deliberate. The counter was bare except for the coffee machine and a stray box of spoons. I ran my hand over the smooth, cool laminate, as if I could feel for an indentation the paper might have left. Nothing. Okay, I said out loud, my voice strange and tight. Okay. I crouched down. I looked under the lip of the counter. Nothing. I got on my hands and knees, my palms flat against the dusty floorboards. I looked under the counter, under the cheap cabinets. Maybe a breeze had caught it. But there was no breeze. The windows were sealed shut. My search became less controlled. I pulled the trash can out from under the sink. It was empty. A clean new bag inside. I upended it anyway, shaking it hard. Nothing fell out but the scent of fresh plastic. I looked behind the refrigerator, a sliver of space, thick with dust and grime. I got a spoon from the box and poked around in the darkness back there. Nothing. My breathing grew short. The panic I'd been holding back started to bubble up, hot and fast. Where was it? Where the hell was it? Where? I stood up, my head spinning. I looked around the apartment, a new, frantic energy coursing through me. I checked the living room floor, under the few boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. I went back to the front door, thinking maybe I dropped it, maybe it had slid back into the hallway. I knelt, my cheek pressed against the cheap wood, and peered through the crack at the bottom. I saw only the patterned hallway carpet. It wasn't there. It was nowhere. And the question hit me like a physical blow, a fist to the gut. Did I imagine it? The thought was venomous. It spread through my veins in an instant, cold and paralyzing. Did I just hallucinate the whole thing? The note slipped under the door. The flimsy paper. The shaky handwriting. Was it all just a mirage? A phantom produced by a stressed-out, sleep-deprived mind in a creepy new apartment? No. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the idea. No. It was real. I could still feel it. I closed my eyes and concentrated, forcing the memory to the surface. I could feel the thin, slightly rough texture of the paper between my thumb and forefinger. I could see the way the black ink had feathered slightly, smudged in one corner. Don't trust them. My name is Lon. The memory was solid. It was vivid. It was real. But the proof was gone. My own mind was turning against me, feeding me conflicting realities. One where I held a physical warning in my hand, another where the counter was always bare. Which one was true? The woman said 3B was empty. I saw a girl. I found a note. The note vanished. Every piece of evidence that I wasn't crazy was being systematically erased, leaving me alone with the crazy. I was being gaslit, not by a person, but by reality itself. I staggered back and leaned against the wall, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. I put my head in my hands. The old woman's face swam in my vision, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Take my advice. Just keep to yourself. She wasn't warning me about a ghost. She was warning me about me. My pocket buzzed. The vibration against my leg was so sudden, so violent in the silence, that I let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. It felt like an electric shock. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I pulled it out and stared at the screen. No caller ID. The words glowed on the dark screen. My thumb hovered over the green icon. Every instinct screamed at me not to answer, to throw the phone against the wall, to smash it into a million pieces. This was it, the next step in the game. But I had to know. The desperate need for an answer, any answer, was stronger than the fear. I swiped to accept the call and slowly, shakily brought the phone to my ear. For a long moment there was nothing but a faint crackling hiss. The sound of an open, empty line. Hello? I whispered, my voice cracking. A sound came through the speaker, a soft, rustling noise, like silk being dragged across a rough surface, or a whisper caught too close to a microphone. Then, a voice. It was barely audible. A thread of sound breathed directly into my ear. It was a woman's voice. It was her voice. Lan's. They took it. The whisper was filled with a chilling, resigned sadness. The air in my lungs turned to stone. Who? I managed to choke out. Who took it? The rustling sound again. Closer this time. A soft, wet intake of breath. They always take everything, she whispered. And then the line went dead. A harsh, final click echoed in my ear, followed by the low, monotonous hum of the dial tone. I snatched the phone away from my head, as if it were burning hot. I stared at the screen. The call had ended. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. My whole body trembled. But through the terror, there was a flicker of vindication. A call. A voice. It was real. She was real. The note was real. I wasn't imagining it. I had proof. It was right here, in my hand. Digital. Undeniable. A record. My thumb flew across the screen, clumsy and slick with sweat. I tapped the phone icon. I went to my call log. My eyes scanned the list of recent calls, searching for the no caller ID entry that had just been there seconds ago. There was nothing. My call from the moving company yesterday. A missed call from my brother this morning. My call to the pizza place last night. That was it. There was no record of an incoming call. Nothing from an unknown number. Nothing in the last hour. According to my phone, the call I had just answered had never happened. My phone was a dead slab of glass in my hand. Useless. A liar. It insisted the call never happened. It insisted the whisper in my ear was a phantom. But my blood knew better. My blood was still fizzing with the shock of it. A carbonated terror that wouldn't go flat. They took it. The words were an echo burned into my brain. They always take everything. My own apartment felt like a cage. The air was thick, used up. Staying here meant waiting for the next thing to vanish. The next piece of my sanity to get chipped away. I had to do something. I couldn't just stand here and let them erase me. Them. The word was a hook, and Mrs. Gable's face was the bait. The friendly old lady downstairs, the one who told me 202 was empty, the one who looked at me like I was a crack in the pavement. I set my phone on the counter, the same counter where the note had been. My jaw was locked so tight my teeth ached. I wasn't going to be the new guy who slowly went crazy in his apartment. I was going to get an answer, a real one, face to face. I walked out the door, not bothering to lock it. What was the point? Whatever this was, it didn't use a key. The hallway carpet, with its ugly brown and orange pattern, seemed to pulse under the flickering lights. The air smelled of dust and something vaguely sour, like old plumbing. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my hand slapping the cool metal railing at each turn. The sound echoed in the stairwell, loud and angry. I pushed through the heavy lobby door and into the courtyard. The late afternoon sun did nothing to warm the space. It was a concrete box, penned in by 4 walls of weary brick. A few sad yellowing patches of grass fought a losing battle against the pavement. A small group of tenants was gathered there, a pathetic little island of humanity. There was a thick-set man in a wife-beater with a can of beer sweating in his hand. A young woman with headphones on, her thumb moving hypnotically over her phone screen. And her, Mrs. Gable. She was holding court in a stained plastic lawn chair, her voice a low, continuous murmur. I stopped. My breath hitched. This was it. I just had to walk over, be normal, casually ask. I rehearsed the words in my head. Hey, sorry to bother you. Quick question. Simple. Easy. My heart was a frantic drum against my sternum. I took a breath and started walking toward them. My footsteps on the concrete sounded too loud, too deliberate. The man with the beer saw me coming, and his chatter trailed off. The woman with the headphones didn't look up. Mrs. Gable turned her head slowly, her eyes, small and dark like raisins, fixing on me. A smile spread across her face, thin and practiced. Well, hello there, dear, she said, her voice syrupy. Settling in all right? Yeah, fine, thanks, I managed. My throat was dry. I just had a quick question. Sorry to interrupt. The man grunted something that might have been a greeting. The woman with the headphones finally looked up, her expression a perfect blank. All the sound in the courtyard seemed to get sucked into a vacuum. The distant city traffic, the hum of an AC unit, the rustle of leaves in the single sad tree, it all just stopped. There was only the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. Their eyes were on me. All of them. Waiting. I was just wondering, I said, forcing the words out. Apartment 202. You're sure it's empty? No one's renting it? The silence stretched. It was an active thing, heavy and pressing. I could feel their collective gaze picking me apart. Mrs. Gable's smile froze on her face. For a split second, it was just a mask, a rictus of teeth and lipstick that had nothing to do with happiness. Then it softened again, melting back into a look of grandmotherly concern. It was a lie. I could see it. I could feel it. Oh, honey, she said, her voice dripping with pity. She said it like she was talking to a confused child. We talked about this, didn't we? I told you, that apartment's been empty for ages. The owner lives overseas. Hasn't been back in years. The man in the wife-beater took a long swallow of his beer, his eyes never leaving mine. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. That's right, he said, his voice a low rumble. Empty as a drum. He nodded slowly, as if confirming a profound universal truth. Sometimes the wind whistles through the hallway up there, makes all kinds of noises. You're new. You're not used to it yet. Makes a man jumpy. He looked at Mrs. Gable. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod back. The woman with the phone lowered it to her lap. They were a wall. A unified front of calm, reasonable people dealing with the new, jumpy guy. I wasn't a neighbor asking a question. I was a problem they were managing. The floor of the courtyard seemed to tilt. They were looking at me, but they weren't seeing me. They were seeing a diagnosis. Stress. Paranoia. The guy who hears things. The guy who sees things that aren't there. My own mind, the one that had just betrayed me with the phone log, screamed in agreement with them, "They're right. It's the wind. It's an old building. You're exhausted." But the whisper in my ear was still there. They took it. The desperation was a hot acid in my throat. I couldn't let them do this. I couldn't let them write me off. But the word came out as a stammer. My hands were shaking. I shoved them into my pockets. But there was someone, a girl, a person named Lon. The name dropped into the courtyard like a stone. Everything changed. It wasn't a gradual shift. It was a switch being flipped. The air went from tense to dangerous in the space of a single heartbeat. The man's hand, halfway to his beer can, stopped. The young woman's blank expression sharpened into something focused, alert. And Mrs. Gable, the change in her was terrifying. The sweet, pitying grandmother evaporated. The fake smile vanished, sucked back into a thin, hard line. Her eyes, no longer raisin-like and soft, became chips of black ice. The wrinkles around them didn't look like laugh lines anymore. They looked like cracks in a stone facade. A cold, reptilian intelligence stared out at me. She leaned forward in her plastic chair, the slight movement full of unspoken threat. "Where?" she said, and her voice was no longer syrupy. It was flat, cold, hard. It was the sound of a file drawer slamming shut. "Did you hear that name?" The question wasn't curiosity. It was an interrogation. A demand. The courtyard was no longer a shared space. It was her territory, and I was an intruder who had spoken a forbidden word. I had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. I could feel the invisible perimeter they had all been guarding, and I had just crashed right through it. My brain stalled. The truth? A note slipped under my door that vanished into thin air? A phone call that my own phone swears never happened? They would call a hospital. They would have me carried out of here in a jacket that buckled up the back. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My mind was a car crash of excuses and panicked lies. Before I could form a single word, the switch flipped back. A loud, jarring laugh erupted from Mrs. Gable. It was a horrible, ugly sound, too loud for the small space, completely devoid of humor. It was a noise meant to shatter the tension she had created. She slapped her knee and stood up, the plastic chair groaning in protest. She came toward me and clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. Her fingers were strong, her grip surprisingly firm. "Lon! Oh, goodness!" she cackled, shaking her head. "Maybe you're thinking of Jan?" Jan in 4B. A sweet girl, but she moved out last spring. You must have misheard something is all. Easy to do in a big new place. Her eyes were smiling again, but the coldness was still there, just beneath the surface. It was a performance, and she was ordering me to applaud. She squeezed my shoulder, a final, sharp warning disguised as a friendly gesture, and then let go. "Well, it's getting chilly. Time for this old lady to head in." She turned to the others. "You all have a good evening now." It was a dismissal, an order, and they obeyed instantly. The man chugged the last of his beer, crushed the can in his fist, and walked toward the lobby door without a backward glance. The young woman put her headphones back on, her face sealed off once more, and moved in the same direction. They didn't walk, they dispersed. Like a flock of birds startled by a gunshot, they were just gone. One moment I was the center of their universe. The next I was standing completely alone in the concrete box. The only sound was the faint hiss of the wind through the alley. I stood there, frozen, The spot on my shoulder where her hand had been felt cold, branded. I looked up at the brick wall of my building, at the grid of dark, silent windows. One of them was 202. One of them was mine. They both felt equally hostile. They weren't just covering for an empty apartment. They were guarding something. That name, Lan, wasn't just a name. It was a key. A trigger. And I had just announced to all of them, to them, that I had it. A profound, chilling certainty settled over me. I hadn't just stumbled upon a secret. I had let them know that I was a threat to it. I hadn't just poked a hornet's nest. I'd kicked it wide open. And now I was standing in the middle of the swarm. Sleep wasn't coming. It wasn't even in the neighborhood. I was sitting on the edge of my sofa in the dark, my knuckles white around the cold aluminum of a baseball bat I'd found in the hall closet. The cheap lacquer was already flaking under my grip. The silence was the worst part. After the bullshit performance in the courtyard, the silence felt loaded. It felt like they were all out there, just across the walls, listening, waiting for me to break. My plan was simple. Stupid, maybe, but simple. Just get through the night. Just survive until the sun came up. In the daylight, things would be different. In the daylight, I could go to the cops. Or find a new place. A hotel. Anything. I just had to make it through the next 8 hours without my brain completely short-circuiting. I kept repeating it to myself. Just get through the night. A mantra against the crawling dread. The bat felt heavy and real in my hands. A solid piece of the world that hadn't lied to me yet. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and stared at the door. I'd wedged a kitchen chair under the knob. It looked pathetic. A joke. Whatever happened in this building, it didn't seem to care about locks. That's when I felt it. It wasn't a sound. It was a change in the air. A sudden, piercing cold that had nothing to do with the AC unit, which was off. It was a pocket of deep freeze cold that snaked across the living room floor and wrapped around my bare ankles. I pulled my feet up onto the sofa, my heart giving a hard, painful kick against my ribs. All the windows were locked. I checked them 3 times. Then came the sound. A single, soft click. It came from the bathroom down the short hall. It wasn't the sound of a pipe settling. It was a clean, mechanical sound, like a medicine cabinet door being carefully, quietly closed. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My entire body went rigid. The bat suddenly felt 10 pounds heavier. My own thoughts were a frantic scramble. It's the wind. It's an old building. You're exhausted. The same excuses the man and the wife-beater had fed me. The same lies they wanted me to believe. But my body knew better. The hair on my arms was standing straight up. Another sound. A faint, wet whisper. Like a cloth wiping a surface. Shit. Okay. No more waiting. No more sitting in the dark like a cornered animal. I slid off the sofa, my bare feet landing silently on the cheap carpet. I held the bat in a 2-handed grip, just like I'd seen in movies. It felt clumsy. I wasn't a tough guy. I was a guy who designed websites, for Christ's sake. But the alternative was to stay here and wait for whatever was in the bathroom to come out. I crept down the hallway. Each step was a universe of time. The floorboards didn't creak, but I imagined they were screaming. The air grew colder as I got closer to the bathroom, the chill seeping into my t-shirt. I could see the hard line of light under the door was off. The room was dark inside. My hand was shaking as I reached for the doorknob. It was cold. Colder than it should have been. I braced myself, took a final, shallow breath, and threw the door open, swinging the bat in front of me. I met empty space. I flicked on the light. The fluorescent bulb buzzed to life, flooding the small, sterile room with a harsh white glare. Nothing. The shower curtain was pulled back. The toilet lid was down. The medicine cabinet was closed. Exactly as I had left it. White tile, white porcelain, white walls. Clean. Empty. My shoulders slumped. A wave of sick relief and self-loathing washed over me. I was losing my mind. They were right. I was the jumpy new guy. The paranoid weirdo, hearing things in the walls. I leaned a hand against the wall, the bat hanging limp in my other hand, its tip tapping against the tile floor. Then I saw it. The mirror over the sink. It was fogged over. Not just a little steamy, but completely opaque, with a thick white condensation, like someone had just taken a long, scalding hot shower. But I hadn't. The air in the room was freezing. The moisture wasn't evaporating. It was clinging to the glass, thick and wrong. And in the very center of the fog, letters had been traced, as if by a single, deliberate finger. The lines were already starting to run, the condensation weeping down the glass in slow, steady drips. But the message was still perfectly clear. Your phone. Check your phone. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't a threat. It was an order. Something had been in here. It had stood right where I was standing now, its finger pressed to the cold glass, leaving a message in the impossible fog. My mind refused to process it. I stared, my mouth hanging open, as the letters slowly sagged and dissolved into meaningless streaks of water, erasing themselves before my eyes. I didn't think. I just reacted. I scrambled back out of the bathroom, turned, and sprinted the few steps to the living room. My phone. Where was my goddamn phone? On the coffee table. I snatched it, my thumb smearing the screen as I fumbled to unlock it. My heart was a frantic drum against my sternum, so loud I could feel the vibration in my throat. I swiped to the photo gallery. My breath hitched. My entire body went cold. There was a new file. A video. The thumbnail was a dark, grainy shot of my own living room ceiling. The timestamp was 3 minutes ago. My thumb hovered over the play icon. I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at me to throw the phone against the wall, to run out the door and never look back. But I had to know. I had to see. I pressed play. The video was shaky, low quality, filmed in the dim light of the room. It was pointed down from a high angle, from the corner where the ceiling met the two walls. It was filming me. I was on the screen, asleep on the sofa, my head lolled to one side, my mouth slightly open. It was from just a few minutes ago, before the click in the bathroom had woken me up. I had dozed off holding the bat. I watched myself, a vulnerable stranger on a screen, completely unaware. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and my own soft breathing. It was raw. It was real. I felt a wave of nausea. Something had been in my apartment, perched in the corner of the room like a spider, watching me, filming me. My grip on the phone tightened. Then, in the video, something entered the frame. From the top right edge of the screen, a hand moved slowly into view. It was long and thin and impossibly pale, the skin almost translucent, the knuckles like little knots of bone. It was a woman's hand, but it was wrong, sickly. It didn't tremble. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was utterly terrifying. It crept into the frame until it was hovering in the air, a few feet from my sleeping head. It stayed there for a second, poised. I held my breath, watching my own screen, my throat closing up. Then the hand did something. It didn't reach for me. It didn't make a fist. It pointed, the long, pale index finger extended, aiming directly toward the bottom of the screen. It was pointing at the phone itself. It was pointing at the source of the recording, at the thing that was filming. It was Lan. That was Lan's hand. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was showing me. This is how they see. This is the proof. My mind exploded. I looked up from the screen, my eyes darting wildly to the high corner of my living room. There was nothing there, just a shadow, just a wall. I looked back at the phone, my mind screaming, and as I watched, the image on the screen flickered. It dissolved into a spray of pixels, and then the screen went black. A small white text box appeared in the center. File does not exist. I tapped the screen. Nothing. I went back to the gallery. The video was gone, vanished, sucked into the same digital void as the call log from earlier. The proof was gone, erased. It was a perfect, calculated act of psychological warfare. Show the victim the impossible truth, then snatch it away, leaving him alone with a memory that defied all logic. A memory that would make him sound like a raving lunatic to anyone he told. They weren't just trying to scare me, they were trying to dismantle me, to break my mind piece by piece until there was nothing left. Before I could even scream, before I could even throw the phone, a new sound ripped through the silence. B Z Z Z Z Z Z Z Z Z Z Z Z T. The doorbell. It wasn't a polite press. It was a long, violent, continuous blast of noise that drilled directly into my skull. Someone was leaning on the button, holding it down, a furious, insistent summons. BZ, ZZ, 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 Z, ZZ, 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 Z, ZZ, ZZ, Z, ZZ, 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 Z, T. It didn't stop. The shrill, electronic shriek echoed in the tiny apartment, vibrating through the floor, through the walls, through my bones. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, phone in one hand, baseball bat in the other. The video had been a message, a silent threat. This was the response. This was them, at my door. They knew I'd seen it. They knew the ghost had tried to show me something, and now they were here to collect. The buzzing went on, a single unbroken scream that promised that whatever was on the other side of that door, it wasn't going to go away. It was just getting started. The buzzing stopped. The silence that crashed in to replace it was 100 times worse. It was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered the air in the apartment. The ghost of the noise was still vibrating in my teeth, in the bones of my skull. My heart was still trying to beat its way out of my chest. I stood locked in place in the center of the living room, bat in one hand, phone in the other. Don't move. The thought wasn't mine. It was an animal instinct that had taken over my brain. Don't move. Don't breathe. They were just outside the door. They had to be. Leaning against the wall, listening, waiting for a floorboard to creak, waiting for me to make a sound, any sound, to confirm I was in here, to confirm I had seen her warning. The bat felt like a toy. The phone felt like a bomb. I sank slowly, my back straight, my knees protesting until I was crouched behind the sofa. My little fortress of cheap fabric and stuffing. I lowered myself to the carpet, pressing my cheek against the synthetic fibers. They smelled like dust and the faint chemical scent of a factory. I kept my eyes on the door, on the pathetic kitchen chair wedged under the knob. A minute passed. It felt like an hour. My own breathing was a thunder in my ears. I forced myself to slow it down, taking in shallow sips of air through my nose, exhaling without a sound. My eyes burned from not blinking. 5 minutes. The building was quiet. Not a footstep from upstairs. Not a TV muted through the walls. Nothing. A complete and total absence of sound. It was the silence of a tomb. The silence of predators, waiting for their prey to think it's safe. 10 minutes. My legs were cramping. A pins and needles sensation crawled up my calf. I ignored it. My focus was a laser beam pointed at the door. I strained my ears, trying to catch the whisper of cloth, the scuff of a shoe in the hallway. Nothing. They were gone. Or they were better at this than I was. I had to know. Pushing myself up with one hand, the bat held tight in the other, I began to crawl. I moved like a soldier in a movie, low and slow, my bare feet and palms making no sound on the carpet. The journey from the sofa to the front door was the longest 10 feet of my life. Every inch was a new negotiation with terror. I reached the wall next to the door. I flattened my body against it, my ear pressed to the cool, cheap paint. I listened. My own heartbeat slammed against my eardrum. Beyond that, the same profound silence. The peephole. Getting to it required me to stand, to expose myself. I took a breath, held it, and rose in one fluid, silent motion. I leaned forward, keeping the bat ready, and put my eye to the tiny glass lens. The hallway swam into view, distorted and curved, lit by a single, buzzing fluorescent light overhead. It was empty. The cheap brown carpet was undisturbed. The off-white walls were blank. The door to the apartment opposite mine was closed. No one was there. My shoulders slumped with a sliver of relief, so sharp it was painful. Then I saw it. Hanging from my outside doorknob, a plastic grocery bag. White, with a cheerful red logo from the corner store. It was knotted loosely around the brass knob, swaying just slightly in a draft I couldn't feel. What the hell? My mind raced. A delivery? A welcome package from the psycho landlord? I stayed at the peephole, staring at the bag. It was such a normal thing. A harmless, everyday object. And that's what made it so terrifying. It didn't belong here. Hanging on my door in the middle of the night after my bell was rung by a phantom, I had to get it. Whatever was in it, it was a message, another move in their sick game. My hand was shaking as I reached for the locks. I had 3 of them. A deadbolt, a chain, and the lock in the knob itself. I undid them, one by one. The sound of the deadbolt retracting was like a gunshot in the silence. I pulled the chair away. My hand hovered over the knob. This was stupid. This was what they wanted. I didn't care. I needed to know. I turned the knob, yanked the door open just wide enough for my arm to slip through, snatched the bag, and slammed the door shut again. I threw all 3 locks back into place in a panicked frenzy. The chain rattled furiously. My back was against the door, my heart hammering. I held the bag in front of me. It was light. I could feel a small, hard, lumpy object inside. With trembling fingers, I fumbled with the knot. It came loose. I tipped the contents into my palm. A set of keys fell out, clinking softly. My keys. The key to my apartment, the key to the main building entrance, the stupid little bottle opener keychain my sister got me for my birthday, they were mine. My blood ran cold. Instinctively, my free hand shot to the front pocket of my jeans. The pocket I always kept my keys in. It was empty. No. I patted it again, harder, a frantic, desperate motion. Then the other pocket. Then my back pockets. Nothing. The smooth, worn fabric was all I felt. But I knew they were there. I felt the familiar hard lump against my thigh when I was sitting on the sofa. I felt it when I walked down the hall to the bathroom. They were in my pocket. I was sure of it. I was 100% sure of it. How? When? My eyes darted around the apartment. No one had come in. The door was locked. The windows were shut. It was impossible. Unless, when I dozed off, did one of them slip in? Silently? Lift the keys from my pocket while I slept just feet away? The thought was so violating it made me want to vomit. There was something else in the bag. A small piece of paper, folded in half. I picked it out. It was a page torn from a cheap notepad. I unfolded it. There was writing on it, in a neat, looping cursive. The kind of handwriting an old woman would have. You dropped these in the courtyard. Be more careful next time, Alex. Underneath the name, there was a little smiley face, drawn with the same blue pen. Alex. They knew my name. The air left my lungs in a rush. I stumbled back from the door, a wave of dizziness washing over me. I braced myself against the wall. The friendly note was the most threatening thing I had ever read. It wasn't a warning. It was a statement of power. We can get to you anytime we want. We can take things from your pocket while you sleep. We know your name. The woman from the courtyard. The one who told me the apartment was empty. The one who called me son. Mrs. Gable. It was her handwriting. I was sure of it. A cold fury, sharp and clear, cut through my fear. The video. Lan's hand. She wasn't the threat. She was the victim. She was trying to show me. The camera, it wasn't hers. It was theirs. They were watching me through it. She was trying to point it out. And they deleted it. And then they came to my door to deliver this goddamn receipt. This proof that they were in control. That the ghost was powerless against them, and so was I. My eyes shot to the living room window, the one that looked down onto the central courtyard. I had to see. I ditched the bat on the floor and walked to the window, my steps heavy, deliberate. The cheap vertical blinds were closed. My hand shook as I reached for the plastic wand to turn them. I twisted it slowly. The slats rotated, opening up thin slices of the world outside. The courtyard was dark, lit by a few weak, yellow security lights that cast long, distorted shadows. The concrete was stained and cracked. A few dead leaves were scattered near a rusted-out drain. And they were there, standing in the middle of the courtyard. A small group, maybe 5 or 6 of them, motionless. I recognized them. The beefy guy and the wife-beater who'd stopped me earlier, a young woman I'd passed on the stairs who always stared a little too long. And right in the center, a small, stooped figure I knew was Mrs. Gable. They weren't talking. They weren't moving. They were just standing there, clustered together like statues in a forgotten park. And they were all looking up, directly at my window. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't in my head. This was real. They knew I had the note. They knew I would look. This was the next act of the play. They were waiting for me. An audience of the damned, waiting for their star to take the stage. Their faces were pale discs in the gloom, their expressions unreadable from this distance. But I didn't need to see their faces to know what was on them. It was a look of ownership, a look of supreme, unholy confidence. They were cultures, waiting for the final twitch. We stayed like that for a long moment. Me, frozen behind my blinds. Them, frozen on the concrete below. A silent, terrifying standoff. The air crackled with it. Then, one of them moved. The guy in the wife-beater. He lifted his arm. In his hand was a phone. He held it up, aiming it right at my window. Not hiding it. He was making a point of it. A tiny, brilliant star of light exploded in the darkness. Flash. The light flooded my vision, a searing white that bleached the world away. I flinched back from the window, my hand flying up to shield my eyes. For a split second, the image was burned onto my retinas. The courtyard, the silent figures, and the piercing, accusatory glare of the camera flash. It was a picture. They were taking my picture. It was a declaration. A promise. We are watching you. We are recording you. You are part of our collection now. There was no escape. They weren't just in the walls. They were everywhere. The game was over. The hunt had begun. And I was the only one who didn't know the rules. The light from the picture was still burned behind my eyes. A white, blinding star. It left an after-image when I closed them, a phantom flash in the darkness of my own head. I stood there, my back against the wall, listening to the jackhammer of my own pulse. The game had changed. They weren't hiding anymore. They were performing. And I was the unwilling star. Fear was a physical thing. It was a cold liquid sloshing in my gut. But underneath it, something else was starting to burn. A hot, sharp fury. They took my keys. They stood in the courtyard and took my picture. They were treating this like a show. Fine. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one. The next morning, the anger had cooled into a hard, dense knot in my chest. I moved on autopilot. Shower. Coffee I didn't taste. Get dressed. The whole time, my mind was a machine, turning over one single thought. Proof. I needed proof. Something they couldn't delete. Something they couldn't explain away. Something I could take to the cops that wouldn't make me sound like a lunatic. The trip to the Best Buy felt like walking through enemy territory. Every person I passed on the street felt like a potential actor in their play. The cashier with the blank smile. The guy stocking shelves who glanced at me for a half-second too long. Was he one of them? The paranoia was a fever, and I couldn't sweat it out. I found what I was looking for in the baby section. A nanny cam. A tiny black cube, no bigger than a sugar cube, with a wide-angle lens. Full HD 1080p, motion detection, cloud storage, the box boasted. I paid in cash, no paper trail. On the way out, I bought a new deadbolt, a heavy-duty one. It was a pathetic gesture, like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, but it made me feel a sliver of control. Back in the apartment, the silence was waiting for me. I worked fast, my hands clumsy but determined. The new deadbolt went on below the others, a third line of defense. It felt good to drill into the door, to make noise, to physically reinforce my space. Then came the camera, the real weapon. I found the perfect spot. On the top shelf of the cheap bookcase, tucked between a worn Stephen King paperback and a dusty college textbook. It blended right in. The black plastic was lost in the shadows. From there, it had a perfect view of the front door, the hallway leading to the bedroom, and most of the living room where I was standing now. I downloaded the app to my phone, connected the camera to my Wi-Fi, and a second later, a live feed of my own apartment stared back at me. Me, a tiny, tense figure in a box, watching myself. Let's see you deny this, you bastards. The plan was simple. I had to create an opportunity. They seemed to toy with me when I was distracted, when I was vulnerable, so I would give them vulnerability. I would be the bait in my own trap. And I had to give my only potential ally, the ghost of the girl Lan, a chance to help me. They had erased her first warning. Maybe she would try again. I walked into the bathroom. My reflection was a stranger. Pale face, dark circles under the eyes. I looked haunted. I slid the window open just a crack, no more than an inch, just enough for the cool night air to whisper through. The last time, she'd written on the mirror, I was counting on her to do it again. An open invitation. My little stage was set. I went back to the living room, grabbed the remote, and turned on the TV. Some dumb sitcom filled the room with fake laughter. I sank onto the sofa, my body angled so I could see the TV but also keep the front door in my peripheral vision. I put my phone face down on the cushion beside me. The camera was recording. The cloud was waiting. All I had to do was wait. An hour passed. The sitcom ended, and a game show started. The bright lights and cheering crowds felt obscene in the tense quiet of my apartment. I didn't move. My eyes flicked from the TV to the door, to the dark hallway. Every creak of the building was a potential footstep. Every distant siren was a warning. I forced myself to breathe evenly. I had to look relaxed. I had to look like I wasn't expecting a thing. Another hour. The game show gave way to the late news. My muscles ached from the tension. The initial rush of adrenaline and anger had faded, leaving behind a thick residue of doubt. What if nothing happened? What if they were just done for the night? The thought was almost more terrifying. The not knowing. The waiting for the other shoe to drop. Forever. I started to feel stupid. A grown man, sitting in the dark, waiting for ghosts and a cult of neighbors to perform for his hidden camera. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe I'd imagined the figures in the courtyard. Maybe the keys had just fallen out of my pocket and some good Samaritan had returned them. No. The flash. The camera flash was real. Lan's hand on the video was real. My own mind was becoming the enemy. It was exactly what they wanted. To break me down from the inside until I couldn't trust my own senses. I clenched my fists. Just a little longer. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the app icon. I just wanted to check. To see that the little green online light was still on. My thumb tapped the screen. The app opened. A live feed loaded. Me, on the couch, illuminated by the flickering blue light of the TV. The angle was perfect. The image was clear. A new thought, cold and sharp, cut through the paranoia. What if they know? I want them time. What if this is all part of their game? They let me buy the camera. They let me set it up. They're watching me watch myself. The idea was so grotesque it made my skin crawl. They were probably laughing at my pathetic little trap. Right then, as if summoned by the thought, it happened. On my phone screen, the little green light next to the camera feed blinked. Once. Twice. Then it turned red. A small, neat message appeared over the frozen image of me on the couch. Device offline. My blood went cold. At the exact same instant, the TV clicked. The local news vanished. The screen went black for a single, heart-stopping second, and then a new image bled into view. It was a movie. Black and white. Grainy. Old. A man in a dark trench coat and a fedora stood in a shadowy room, his back to the camera. He was carefully, methodically planting a bug, a small, circular listening device, underneath a heavy wooden desk. The only sound was the faint crackle of old film and a low, ominous string section on the movie's soundtrack. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My eyes were glued to the screen. The man in the movie finished his work. He stood up, straightened his hat, and walked over to an old tabletop radio. He switched it on. More static. Then, a voice. It crackled through the TV speakers. A calm, clear, baritone voice from another era. A voice from the movie. A voice that wasn't for the man in the trench coat. It was for me. You think we don't know, Alex? The world stopped. The air crystallized in my lungs. It was my name. It came out of the goddamn TV. Out of a 60-year-old movie. It was impossible. It was happening. My heart exploded in my chest. I scrambled off the couch, knocking my phone to the floor. The voice from the TV, calm and mocking, had severed the last thread holding my sanity together. This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't random. This was a direct message. A demonstration of power so complete, so absolute, it was meant to shatter me. I stood shaking in the middle of the room. The old movie continued to play, the man in the trench coat now listening intently to the radio, as if he too had heard it. It was a nightmare, a perfectly scripted, perfectly executed nightmare. My phone. The camera. I dropped to my knees, my hands scrabbling on the carpet until I found my phone. The screen was still lit up with the device offline message. I frantically stabbed at the reconnect button. It spun for a second, then failed. I tried again. Failed. They cut it off. They cut off my only witness. My fingers flew across the screen, pulling up the app's settings menu. I had to know how. I tapped through to the network connection history. A list of devices that had accessed the camera's feed appeared. There was my phone, listed by its proper name. Below it was another entry, a recent connection. Just a minute ago, a device I had never seen before, a name I didn't recognize. It wasn't a random string of numbers and letters. It was a word, a message, a promise. Wi-Fi name, can't_hide. Forget it. Fuck it all. The words, can't_hide, glowed on the screen. A digital scar burned into my brain. The mocking voice from the TV still echoed in the apartment's dead air. My trap hadn't just failed. It had been turned into another prop in their show. They knew. They always knew. The fury from the morning was gone, burned away by a tidal wave of pure animal fear. There was no plan B, no clever strategy. The game was over. They won. The only move left was to get off the board. Out, I whispered, the word a dry crackle in my throat. Get out. My body moved before my brain could argue. I scrambled into the bedroom, yanking my old suitcase from the top of the closet. It crashed to the floor, sending up a puff of dust. I threw it open on the bed and started ripping clothes from drawers. T-shirts, socks, jeans. I didn't care what. I just needed to be moving, doing something, anything other than standing still and waiting for the next violation. My hands were shaking, clumsy. I dropped a handful of socks on the floor and didn't bother to pick them up. The apartment felt alien. Every shadow was a hiding place, every corner a blind spot. The air was thick, heavy, like I was moving through water. I could feel their eyes on me. I knew it. They were watching from the courtyard, from the apartment across the hall, maybe through the lens of my own goddamn camera that was now their tool. Watching me break, just get the important stuff. Wallet, keys, phone, passport. Wallet and phone were in my pocket. Keys, the ones I had left, were on the kitchen counter. I'd grabbed them on the way out. Passport. I stumbled to the dresser, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Top drawer. I yanked it open. It stuck for a second, then gave with a rattling groan. T-shirts. I shoved them aside, my fingers digging for the slim blue booklet I kept tucked in the back. My hand hit something hard, something wooden. I stopped. My breathing hitched. It wasn't mine. Slowly, as if pulling my hand from a fire, I drew it back. Tucked between a stack of white undershirts on the back of the drawer was a small, dark wooden box. It was old, the corners worn smooth with time. Intricate carvings of vines and small, closed flowers curled around its sides. It was maybe 6 inches long, 4 inches wide. It had no place here. I had never seen it before in my life. How? How could it be here? Mas why go lesive? They put it here. The thought was a jolt of ice in my veins. This was another move in their game, another piece of the script. My first instinct was to slam the drawer shut, to leave it, to run out the door right now and never look back. But I couldn't. My eyes were fixed on it. It was a message, like the flash in the courtyard, like the voice from the TV. It was meant for me. My fingers, trembling, closed around the cool wood. It was heavier than it looked. I lifted it from the drawer. There was a small, tarnished brass latch on the front. My thumb brushed against it. I knew I shouldn't. I knew this was exactly what they wanted. For me to engage, to play along. But Lon, her hand on the glass, her desperate, silent warning. Maybe this was from her. Another attempt. I had to know. I took a deep breath, the air scraping my throat, and I flicked the latch open. It didn't spring open with a pop. Instead, the lid lifted with a faint, weary sigh. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a sound started. A slow, plinking melody, played on tiny metal teeth. It was a music box. The tune was simple, melancholic, and slightly off-key, like a memory half forgotten. It made the hair on my arms stand up. I looked inside. The plush lining was faded red velvet, worn down to the threads in places. There was no spinning ballerina, no little porcelain figure. The space where it should have been was empty, just a few faint scratches showing where it had once been mounted. But there was something else. Lying flat on the velvet was a small, sepia-toned photograph. The edges were curled and yellowed with age. With a hand that felt disconnected from my body, I picked it up. It was her, Lan, the girl from the video. She looked younger here, maybe late teens, her hair pulled back from her face. She was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile that lit up her eyes. It was a smile from another life, a life before this building. Standing next to her was a young man, his arm around her shoulder. He was lean, with dark hair that fell over his forehead, and he was looking at her, not the camera, with an expression of such open affection that it made my chest ache. They looked happy. They looked real. A wave of dizziness washed over me. This wasn't just a ghost. This wasn't just a series of strange events. This was a person, a girl who had lived, who had loved, a girl who was now a silent specter in my apartment. I turned the small photograph over. There was writing on the back, faded brown ink, written in a neat, careful script, a man's handwriting. My eyes struggled to make out the words in the dim light of the bedroom. For Lan, my love. The basement. The basement. The words didn't compute at first. They were just words on a piece of old paper. Then, they slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. A clue. A location. A final message. This is what she was trying to tell me. This whole time. The warnings, the writing on the mirror that they kept erasing, it was all leading to this. The basement. Whatever happened to her? The answer was in the basement. The music box in my other hand kept playing its sad off-key tune, a soundtrack to the revelation. They hadn't put this here to torment me. Lan had. She found a way. She slipped it into my life, a Trojan horse carrying her final secret. And the others, the neighbors, they didn't know about it. This one thing they had missed. A spark of something that wasn't fear flickered inside me. It was hope. Thin and sharp as a shard of glass, this was it, the proof. The one thing they couldn't take back or delete or gaslight me into disbelieving. I read the words again. The basement. And in that exact moment, as my eyes traced the faded ink, a shadow fell across the sliver of light under my bedroom door. My head snapped up. The world went silent. Even the music box seemed to stop. Or maybe my own blood was roaring so loudly in my ears I couldn't hear it anymore. The shadow was motionless. A solid, human-shaped silhouette, standing right outside my bedroom. Someone was in the hall. Someone was in my apartment. I wasn't breathing. My body was locked. A statue of ice and terror. It was one of them. The man from the courtyard. The woman from the welcome committee. They were here. Inside. Then came the sound. A sound that broke the world. The soft, deliberate scrape of a key sliding into the lock of my front door. A pause. Then the metallic clack-clack of the tumblers turning. My mind shattered. A key. They had a key. The key they took from me, the key they returned. It wasn't a gesture of goodwill. It was a statement. We can come in whenever we want. They weren't picking the lock. They weren't breaking a window. They were just walking in. Like they owned the place. Like I was just a guest whose time was up. Panic, absolute and overwhelming, exploded in my chest. My legs unlocked. I had to move, hide, run. But where? They were at the front door. The only other way out was the window. A 3-story drop to the concrete courtyard where they had taken my picture. A trap. The whole apartment was a trap. The front door. I could hear it begin to swing open on its hinges, a low, drawn-out groan that was the sound of my life ending. The music box. My eyes shot down to the box in my left hand, the photo in my right. This was it. The only thing that mattered. The proof. Lan's message. I couldn't let them find it. I couldn't let them erase this too. In a single, desperate motion, born of pure instinct, I lunged for the open suitcase on my bed. I shoved the photograph back inside the box, slammed the lid shut, cutting off the sad little tune mid-note. I buried it deep under the chaotic pile of t-shirts and jeans, a wooden heart and a useless body of clothes. I had to protect it. It wasn't just a clue anymore. It was her last will and testament. It was the only voice she had left. My back was to the bedroom door. My hands were still buried in the suitcase, shielding her secret. I was a cornered rat, but I was guarding the one thing they couldn't have. From the front of the apartment, the sound of the door swinging fully open was followed by a soft, final click as it shut, sealing us all in together. The soft click of the front door latching shut was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was an ending, a period at the end of a sentence I didn't get to finish writing. My body was a block of stone. My hands were still plunged into the chaos of clothes in the suitcase, fingers clenched around the smooth, cool wood of the music box. I was a statue facing the wrong way, my back to the enemy that was now in the room with me. In my room, in my home, silence, a thick, heavy silence that pressed in from all sides. I couldn't hear breathing. I couldn't hear movement. There was only the frantic, drumming beat of my own heart, a terrified bird trapped in my ribcage. My own breathing had stopped completely. Don't turn around. If you don't see them, they aren't real. A floorboard groaned softly to my left, near the entrance to the hall. The spell broke. I ripped my hands from the suitcase and spun around, my back hitting the wall next to my bedroom door. My eyes darted wildly, trying to take in everything at once. They were standing in the short hallway that led to the living room. Two of them. Mrs. Gable, the woman from the welcome committee, with the too sweet smile and the dead eyes. And beside her, the man from the courtyard. The one who had watched me from the shadows, his face a permanent mask of indifference. He was just as I remembered, tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. They weren't even looking at me. They were looking around the apartment, a flicker of something in their eyes. Appraisal. Ownership. Then, Mrs. Gable's eyes landed on me. The smile she gave me was wide, bright, and had nothing to do with her eyes. It was a mask made of flesh. "There you are," she said, her voice a syrupy melody that made my skin crawl. "We were just about to knock. Going somewhere in a hurry, dear?" My mouth was dry. My throat felt like it was full of sand. I tried to speak, but only a croak came out. I swallowed hard, my eyes flitting from her smiling face to the man's blank expression, and then to the front door. The locked front door. "This is my apartment," I finally managed, the words feeling clumsy and foreign. You can't just walk in here. How did you get a key?" The man didn't react, didn't even blink. He just watched me. But Mrs. Gable let out a small, tinkling laugh. Like I'd just told a charming joke. "Oh, silly. We're the welcoming committee. We have a master key for emergencies. We were worried. We heard a loud thump from up here." She gestured vaguely. "Just wanted to make sure everything was all right." A lie. A bald-faced, effortless lie. There was no thump. The only sound had been the suitcase hitting the floor inside my bedroom. They couldn't have heard that. They were here for another reason. The man took a slow, deliberate step forward. I flinched, pressing myself harder against the wall. He ignored me. His eyes swept the living room and settled on the small bookshelf where my security camera was perched. The camera I had so cleverly set up. The camera that had shown me nothing. He walked over to it without a word. His movements were economical, unhurried. He picked up the camera, turned it over in his large hands. For a second, I felt a wild, insane flicker of hope. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they think it's just a... He popped the small cover on the back and slid out the tiny micro SD card. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger, angling it so the light from the lamp caught its surface. He looked directly at me. "Looking for this?" His voice was low and gravelly. It was the first time I'd heard him speak. Devoid of any emotion, it was infinitely more terrifying than Mrs. Gable's false warmth. My blood ran cold. He didn't wait for an answer. With a casual, almost lazy motion, he brought his thumbnail down on the card. There was a sharp snap. The sound cut through the quiet room like a gunshot. He opened his fingers and let the two broken pieces of black plastic fall to the hardwood floor. Useless. My proof. My trap. My sanity. Gone. Just like that. What do you want from me? I whispered, my voice trembling. Mrs. Gable took a few steps into the room, her gaze sweeping over my messy packing. My frantic attempt to flee. She tutted softly, a sound of mock disapproval. Now. Now. There's no need for that tone, she said, her smile never wavering. She walked over to my small dining table, ran a finger over its surface, checking for dust. Young people these days. So much anxiety. We just want to make sure our community is a safe, peaceful place. That's all. We're a family here in this building. We look out for one another. Her eyes stopped, locking onto the open suitcase on my bed. It felt like a physical touch, a cold, probing finger tracing the outline of the music box buried beneath my t-shirts. The air left my lungs. My entire universe shrank to that single point. That suitcase. That secret. Don't go over there. Please, God, don't go over there. She took a step toward the bedroom. Packing for a trip? So sudden. Just cleaning out, I lied, my voice cracking. Getting organized. The man was still standing by the bookshelf, a silent, immovable mountain. He hadn't taken his eyes off me. He knew I was lying. They both knew. This was a game. They were toying with me, watching me squirm, savoring every second of my terror. Mrs. Gable's eyes stayed on the suitcase for a long moment. I could see the gears turning behind her placid smile. The calculation. The curiosity. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a frantic plea. Don't let her find it. That's all I have left. That's all Lan has left. The silence stretched. It was a wire pulled taut, humming with a terrible energy. I expected her to walk into the bedroom, to dump the suitcase on the floor, to hold up the music box with a triumphant smile. But she didn't. She turned away from the bedroom, the smile somehow becoming even wider, more strained. Well, it looks like everything is fine here after all, just a little misunderstanding. She walked back towards the front door. We'll let you get back to your organizing. The man followed her, his heavy presence receding from the room. He didn't look back. At the door, Mrs. Gable paused, her hand on the knob. She looked over her shoulder at me, one last time. Remember, dear, she said, her voice dropping a little, losing some of its fake sweetness and taking on a hard, polished edge. We're always watching out for you. We just want what's best for the community. Then she opened the door, and they were gone. The door clicked shut again. I didn't move. I stood frozen against the wall, listening to the pounding in my ears. My legs were shaking so violently, I thought they would give out. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, my head in my hands. They knew everything. They had a key, they disabled my camera, they watched me, they played with me, and they left me here, trapped in this box with my own fear. It was over. I had to get out. Now. Forget the suitcase, forget everything. Just run. But then, a thought cut through the panic. A tiny, desperate thought that I had almost forgotten. The decoy. My mind flashed back to this morning. The rage. The certainty that they would find the camera. The last-ditch fuck-you plan I'd made when I thought I had nothing left to lose. My phone. My head snapped up. My phone wasn't in my pocket. My eyes scanned the room, landing on the dusty, neglected potted plant in the corner, on the floor behind the armchair. A different angle. A different view. A backup. A secret they didn't know. Hope, jagged and painful, stabbed through the terror. I scrambled to my feet, my legs clumsy and weak. I stumbled across the room, my hands shaking as I reached behind the armchair. My fingers brushed against the cool metal and glass. It was there. It was still there. I pulled it out. The screen was black. My heart sank. Did the battery die? Did they find it too? I pressed the power button. The screen lit up, showing the recording interface. It was still going. My thumb, slick with sweat, fumbled with the stop button and then stabbed at the gallery icon. The most recent video was there, 1 hour and 12 minutes long. I sank to the floor, my back against the armchair, and hit play. The video was stable, shot from a low angle. It showed the living room, the hallway entrance, and a clear view of my bedroom doorway. I fast-forwarded, the timeline scrubbing through minutes of an empty, silent room. My fingers shook. I slowed it down. There. A flicker of movement in the bedroom doorway. It wasn't a person. It was a shimmer, a distortion in the air, like heat rising from pavement. The image on the phone glitched for a second, a line of static cutting across the screen. Then, the shimmer coalesced. It was her. Lan. She was just as she had been in the video, translucent and faint. I could see the wall and the doorframe right through her. She was holding something, a small, dark object. The music box. My breath caught in my throat. She drifted, not walked, into the bedroom, her form wavering. She was there for a few seconds, then she drifted back out, her hands empty. She paused in the doorway, and for a terrifying second, her hazy face turned directly toward the hidden phone. There was no expression I could read, just a deep, profound sadness. Then she faded, dissolving back into nothing. She put it there. She put the box in my drawer. It was her. A warning. A clue. A new wave of chills washed over me, but this was different. It wasn't just fear. It was awe. Grief. I wasn't going crazy. She was real. I kept watching, my thumb hovering over the timeline. I saw myself burst into the room, rip the suitcase down, start throwing clothes in. I watched myself discover the box, open it, find the picture. I saw my own face, pale and strained in the dim light, as I read the words on the back. The basement. Then I saw it. The shadow falling under my bedroom door. My own body freezing. And then, the front door opened on the video. I watched them enter, Mrs. Gable and the man. I saw their fake smiles, heard their fake concern. I watched the man walk over to the decoy camera, his back to my phone. I watched him snap the SD card, the sound tiny and thin through the phone's cheap microphone. I watched them leave. The video should have ended there. But I let it play. The door clicked shut. On the screen, the apartment was empty again. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then I heard it. A sound from outside the apartment, faint but clear, picked up by the phone's microphone. The sound of the front door opening again. But no one came in. Instead, I heard their voices from the hallway. They must have been standing right outside, thinking I couldn't hear. Their voices were different now. The fake warmth was gone. The gravelly monotone was gone. They were sharp, cold, and quiet. The ghost left something again, Mrs. Gable's voice said. There was no sweetness in it now. It was flat. Hard. Like a stone. There was a grunt of affirmation from the man. He found it, she continued. I saw it on his face. He knows. Or he's close to knowing. This one is smarter than the last one. A pause. I held my breath. My world had tilted on its axis. Then came the man's voice, no longer disguised. It was chillingly practical. Businesslike. So we proceed? Another pause, this one longer. I could hear a faint hum, the sound of the building's ancient electricity. Yes, Mrs. Gable said finally, her voice like a chip of ice. He's packed. Makes it easier. Wait an hour. Let him think he's safe. Then it's time to clean up. My phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the floor. The sound barely registered. My mind was a deafening void. The ghost left something again. This one is smarter than the last one. Time to clean up. The pieces didn't just fall into place. They slammed together with the force of a car crash, building a new reality so horrible I couldn't breathe. Lan. The ghost. She wasn't the threat. She wasn't haunting me. She was trying to warn me. The disappearing objects. The messages on the mirror. The music box. They weren't attacks from a malicious spirit. They were desperate messages from a murdered girl, messages her killers kept erasing. They weren't trying to gaslight me into thinking the ghost wasn't real. They were trying to stop me from learning the truth. They were hunting her. They were silencing her, even in death. They killed her. The last one. They killed her and hid the evidence. In the basement. And I was the new tenant in her tomb. The new problem that needed to be solved. My eyes lifted from the floor and stared at the front door. It wasn't a way out. It was the gate to my cage. And the keepers were just outside, waiting. They gave me a key that didn't matter. They knew all my plans. They were letting me have one last hour of hope. One last hour of life. The fear I had felt before, the fear of a ghost, of the unknown, was a child's nightmare compared to this. This was a cold, simple, and certain truth. The monsters were real. They had names and faces. They smiled at me. And in 1 hour, They were coming back to clean up. My lungs refused to work. I was a vacuum, a hollowed-out space where a person used to be. The phone lay on the floor, its screen dark, the clatter of its fall still echoing in a mind that had gone completely silent. Time to clean up. The words weren't a memory. They were a brand, seared onto the inside of my skull. It wasn't a threat. It was a schedule, an appointment I was going to keep. In 1 hour. Or less. My limbs were concrete. I was still crouched behind the armchair, a position that felt like a pathetic attempt at a hiding spot. My eyes were fixed on the front door. The wood grain seemed to twist and writhe. It wasn't an exit. It was a lid. The lid to my coffin. I drew a breath. It was a ragged, sharp thing that hurt my chest. My hand, shaking, reached down and closed around the phone. The other hand found the music box, still sitting on the couch cushion where I'd left it. Its smooth, cool wood felt like the only solid thing in the universe. A message from a ghost. A final gift from a girl whose killers were coming for me next. The building was quiet. Not normal quiet. Not the late-night quiet of a high-rise where you hear the distant hum of a refrigerator or the faint bass of a neighbor's TV. This was a dead quiet. I held breath. They had silenced the entire building. They were listening for me. For one sound. One mistake. I pushed myself up, my joints screaming in protest. My legs felt like they were filled with wet sand. I had to try. I had to do something other than wait for them to come and clean up. My thumb, slick with sweat, unlocked the phone. The screen's light was blindingly bright in the dim room. I mashed the phone icon. 911. My finger hovered over the green call button. What do you say? My neighbors are going to kill me? They're ghost hunters and the ghost is trying to help me? They'll think I'm insane. It didn't matter. I had to try. I pressed the button. The phone didn't even try to connect. A small pop-up appeared instantly. No service. Of course. My heart hammered against my ribs. Okay. Plan B. Wi-Fi? A Wi-Fi call? An email? Anything. I swiped down, my fingers clumsy, tapped the Wi-Fi icon. The phone searched. And searched. The little wheels spun and spun. Usually, a dozen networks popped up. APT-4B_guest. Xfinity Wi-Fi. Linksys. G_unit. My own network. All of them. Now there was nothing. Just the words, no networks found. They cut it. They cut everything. The gas, the water, the electricity. They were probably next. They had turned my apartment, my little box in the sky, into a true island. Completely isolated. No signals in, no signals out. A new sound cut through the silence. It was distant. The ding of the elevator. My blood ran cold. Was it them? Was the hour up already? I flattened myself against the wall, my eyes glued to my front door. I listened, every nerve ending on fire. The elevator doors slid open. I heard the soft thump as they hit their limit. Then, footsteps. Not on my floor. A floor below, maybe. Or above. I couldn't tell. The sound traveled through the building's concrete bones. Then another ding. Another elevator. And more footsteps. They weren't coming for me. Not yet. They were assembling. My mind, scrambling for any kind of logic, pieced it together. The welcome committee. The whole building. They were gathering. A hunting party. I had to move. I couldn't stay in the living room. It was a kill box. The bedroom? Too easy to corner me. The kitchen? No other exit. The front door? The peephole. I had to see. I had to know what I was up against. Moving was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every shift of my weight threatened to make a floorboard creak. Every breath felt like a shout in the crushing silence. I moved like a man underwater, one slow, deliberate step at a time, my back scraping along the wall. The phone was clutched in my right hand, the music box in my left. A useless phone and a ghost's memento, my weapons. The 10 feet to the door felt like a mile. Finally, my fingers touched the cool metal of the door. I leaned my ear against the wood. Silence. No, not silence. I could hear it now. A faint, collective shuffle. The sound of fabric rubbing against fabric. The sound of multiple people standing perfectly still, right outside my door. Waiting. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't make a sound. Don't make a sound. A sound came anyway. A sound that made my heart stop. Tap, tap, tap. 3 soft, polite knocks on my door. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. I was frozen solid. The knock wasn't a question. It wasn't someone asking to be let in. It was a statement. We're here. I waited. A minute passed. An eternity. Then, from further down the hall, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. On another door. Land's door. Apartment 14D. A chill, so profound it felt like death itself, crawled up my spine. This was a game. A ritual. They were walking the hall, knocking on the doors of the dead and the soon-to-be dead. A roll call. I heard the slow, measured footsteps again. They faded a little, then grew louder. They were pacing. Marching. A slow, endless parade in front of my door. I had to see. The need to know was a physical pain, greater than the fear. My hand rose, shaking so badly I could barely guide it. My thumb and forefinger pinched the small, brass cover of the peephole. It felt impossibly heavy. Lifting it would make a sound, a tiny scrape of metal on metal. In this silence it would be a gunshot. I held my breath until my lungs burned. Slowly, so slowly, I lifted the cover. The fisheye lens warped the hallway into a nightmarish tunnel. They were there. My God, they were all there. Not crowded together, but spread out, lining the hallway like a deranged honor guard. I saw Mrs. Gable. I saw the man from the courtyard. I saw the skinny guy from the mailroom and the woman with the 2 yapping dogs I always saw in the elevator. The man who had held the door for me yesterday, nodding with a small smile. At least 10 of them. Residents. Neighbors. A family, Mrs. Gable had said. They were all standing with their backs to me, facing Land's door. It was an impossible scene, a silent, standing vigil for a girl they had murdered. Or were they guarding it? Was her ghost trapped in there? My mind reeled. What in God's name was happening in this building? They were standing between 2 doors, hers and mine. A wall of smiling faces and dead eyes blocking the only way out. They knew I was in here. They knew I was watching. The whole thing felt like a performance put on just for me. A play where I was the only audience member, and the final act was my own death. How long did I stand there, one eye pressed to the peephole, watching the backs of my executioners? I don't know. Time had ceased to mean anything. There was only the before and the coming after. Then it happened. Without a sound, without a signal, they all turned. It wasn't a natural movement. It wasn't one person turning, then another noticing and turning as well. They moved as one. A single organism with many heads. A hive mind. One moment they were facing away. The next. They were all looking forward. Looking directly at my door. Directly at the peephole. Directly at me. Their faces filled the tiny, distorted lens. 10 pairs of eyes, all focused on my one. Some were smiling faint, knowing smiles. The man from the courtyard was impassive, a block of stone. But Mrs. Gable, her smile was wide and bright. The same smile from my living room. The same mask made of flesh. I saw her lift her hand, slowly. She brought a single, manicured finger up to her lips. The lipstick was a perfect, blood-red slash in the warped view. She pressed her finger to her lips, a gesture known the world over. Shh! My legs gave out. I didn't fall. I stumbled backward, my shoulders hitting the opposite wall with a dull thud. The peephole cover fell shut with a tiny click that sounded like a scream. I slid down the wall to the floor, my head in my hands. The phone and the music box clattered beside me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. There was nothing but that final image burned onto my retinas. A dozen faces staring. A red-lipped smile. A finger pressed to her lips. It wasn't a warning to be quiet. It was a promise of the silence to come. My back was pressed against the drywall, the texture imprinting itself on my skin through my thin t-shirt. My legs were numb. My mind was a white screen, playing one image on a loop. A dozen faces in a peephole, a single manicured finger pressed to blood-red lips. Shh! The silence in the apartment was a physical thing. It had weight. It pushed in on me, filled my ears. On the floor beside me lay the two artifacts of my new reality. The phone, a dead rectangle of glass and plastic, and the music box. My hand, moving with a tremor I couldn't control, reached for the box. Its wood was smooth, a solid, real thing in this nightmare. It was a message, a warning. Her last attempt to speak. The woman from the phone call, Lan. What did she say? What were her exact words? My mind, a frantic mess of fear and adrenaline, clawed through the memory of the phone call. There was the static, her terrified whispers, the sound of their approach. And then, one word, clear as a bell, right before the line went dead. Basement. It wasn't a random word. It couldn't be. It was a destination. A clue. Hope was a dangerous thing to have right now, but it was all I had left. I sat up, ignoring the pins and needles in my legs. I turned the music box over and over in my hands. It was simple, unadorned. No markings, no brand name, just polished, dark wood. The lid was closed tight. I ran my thumb along the seam, around the small, tarnished brass hinges. Nothing. I shook it gently. No rattle, nothing loose inside. It was just a box. No, I refused to believe that. This was her final gift. It had to mean something. I looked closer, my eyes tracing every line, every joint. My thumb scraped against something rough near the back hinge. Not rough. It was raised. A tiny speck of metal, no bigger than a pinhead, almost invisible against the dark brass. It wasn't part of the hinge. It was an addition. My fingernail was too thick. I fumbled for my keys, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I used the sharp edge of my apartment key to pry at the pin. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a faint click, the pin popped out. It was a tiny, primitive locking mechanism. The entire bottom of the box shifted. My breath caught in my throat. I turned it over and pressed. The false bottom swung open on a hidden hinge, revealing a shallow, felt-lined compartment. It wasn't empty. Inside lay two objects. A small, tightly folded piece of yellowed paper, and another piece of paper, larger, folded into a neat square. My heart hammered against my ribs. A sign. A real, physical sign. I picked up the smaller piece first. The paper was brittle, threatening to crumble in my trembling fingers. I carefully unfolded it. It was a newspaper clipping. From a local paper I didn't recognize. The date at the top was from almost exactly 1 year ago. Local woman missing from high-rise. Police suspect no foul play. There was a grainy photo of a young woman with dark hair and a bright, hopeful smile. My blood ran cold. It was the girl from the photo in the mailroom. The girl Mrs. Gable had told me about. The headline was a lie. The whole building was the foul play. I read the short article. Lan Yan, age 23, a resident of the building, had been reported missing by her family. Police had searched her apartment, 14D, and found her belongings undisturbed. Wallet, keys, phone, all there. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of a struggle. They had treated it as a case of someone who had simply walked away from their life. Her case file was still open, but inactive. She hadn't walked away. They had made her disappear. They had cleaned up, just like they were planning to do to me. My hands were shaking worse now. I put the clipping down and picked up the second piece of paper. It unfolded into a hand-drawn map. It wasn't an architectural blueprint. It was simple, sketched in blue ink. A floor plan. I recognized it instantly. My apartment. 14C. There was my front door. The living room. The bedroom. All the rooms were labeled. But there was something else. A dotted line. Starting in the back of the bedroom closet, the line went through the rear wall of the building, into a space marked service duct, and then straight down, ending with an arrow pointing to the word basement. A way out. A secret path. A hidden artery running through the bones of this concrete tomb. She hadn't just given me a warning. She had given me an escape route. The silence outside the door was broken. A soft scraping sound. Metal on metal. My head snapped up. I listened. Every muscle in my body tensed. It was coming from my front door. The peephole cover. Someone was lifting it from the outside. I dove back, scrambling behind the armchair, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. They were checking, making sure I was still here, that I hadn't somehow vanished. The scraping stopped. I imagined an eye pressed to the other side of the lens, scanning my living room, seeing the couch, the TV, the empty space where I was supposed to be. I held my breath. A minute passed. 2. The silence returned, heavier than before. They knew I was hiding. The game was escalating. I had to move. Now. The closet was my only chance. I grabbed the map and the clipping and shoved them into my pocket. I left the phone. It was useless. I took the music box. It felt right. It was hers. Getting from the armchair to the bedroom door was the longest journey of my life. I stayed low, crawling on my hands and knees, wincing at every tiny groan of the floorboards. The air was thick. I felt their eyes on me, even through the walls. I made it to the bedroom doorway, pushed the door open just enough to slip through. The closet was at the far end of the room. I got to my feet and crossed the room in a silent, desperate dash. I threw the closet door open. It was packed with my unpacked boxes and clothes I still had on hangers. Frantic, I started pulling everything out, shirts, jackets, a box of books. I threw them onto the bed, not caring about the noise anymore. The time for quiet was over. The time for survival was here. Finally, the back of the closet was clear. It was just a flat, painted wall. My hopes sank. Was the map wrong? Was this some final, cruel joke? My hands flew over the surface, patting, pressing. It felt solid. Just drywall. No seams. No handle. Nothing. No, I whispered. My voice a dry rasp. Then my fingers brushed over a spot that felt different. 2 small, almost invisible indentations, side by side, near the floor, like someone had pushed their fingers into the wall when the plaster was still wet. I jammed my own fingers into the indentations. They were a perfect fit. I pulled. The panel of drywall groaned in protest, but it moved. A hidden door, cut perfectly into the wall and painted over. No hinges. It was just a heavy plug of wood and drywall. Behind it was darkness, a square of perfect black nothing. And then the sound came from the living room. Jiggle, 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 click, rattle. The front doorknob. It wasn't a turn. It was a violent, frantic shake. Someone was testing it. Forcing it. I froze, my fingers still hooked into the secret panel. A fist hammered against the front door. Not a knock. A blow. Boom. The whole apartment seemed to shudder. Boom. 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 They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. They weren't playing a game. Then, a sound that made my soul turn to ice. A high-pitched, metallic shriek. They were using something on the lock. A drill. Or a crowbar. The groaning of stressed metal filled the air. They were coming through. My adrenaline spiked. I yanked on the panel with all my strength. It scraped against the frame, peeling paint, and tilted forward. I pulled it free and tossed it aside. A rush of cold, foul air hit my face. It smelled of damp concrete, rust, decay. I peered into the darkness. It was a shaft, just like the map showed. A narrow maintenance corridor filled with pipes and conduits, dropping straight down into blackness. An old metal ladder was bolted to the far wall. The sound from the front door was getting worse. A loud crack echoed through the apartment as the wood of the doorframe splintered. They were seconds away. There was no choice. I threw the music box into the darkness ahead of me, hearing it clatter on something metal below. I swung my legs into the opening, my shoes finding the top rung of the ladder. It was slick with something damp and cold. I scrambled down, my hands clumsy on the rungs, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I risked a look up. The light from my bedroom was a pale rectangle above me. Then I heard it. A final, loud crunch from the front of the apartment, followed by the sound of the door swinging open and hitting the wall. The sound of footsteps. Many of them. Entering my home. I had to close the opening. I scrambled back up the last few rungs, my fingers reaching for the edge of the panel. I grabbed it, my muscles straining to pull the heavy plug back into place. Just as it was about to slot in, I heard her voice. It wasn't from the living room. It was right there. Right outside the panel. In my bedroom. Clear and calm and impossibly close. It was Mrs. Gable. He's not here. A pause. Then, her voice, stripped of all its fake warmth, became sharp, commanding. He's going to the basement. I yanked the panel. It slammed shut with a muffled thud, plunging me into absolute, suffocating darkness. Her final words cut through the wood as if she were whispering right into my ear. Block all the exits. Darkness. Absolute. The panel thudded shut and the world vanished. Her voice was the last thing to exist. Block all the exits. A blade of sound twisting in my ear before being swallowed by a blackness so complete it felt like a physical substance, packing itself into my mouth and lungs. My own breathing was a cannon blast in the sudden quiet. My heart was a fist hammering against the inside of my ribs, trying to get out. The stench hit me second. It was the smell of a forgotten place, of things left to rot. Damp concrete, wet rust, something sour and organic, like old garbage left in a metal can for a year. The air was cold, dead. I was in the building's guts. My legs were tangled in the small opening, my body half in, half out. My fingers, slick with sweat, were still gripping the lip of the heavy panel. Above, in my apartment, I heard them. The heavy tread of work boots on my floorboards. More than one person. A low murmur of voices, too muffled to make out words, but the tone was all business. A search party. I had to move. Letting go of the panel, I swung my other leg into the shaft. My shoe scraped against metal. I found the rung. It was cold, slick with condensation or something worse. My hands found the ladder's sides. I started down, one rung at a time, moving blind. Scrape, thud, scrape, thud. The sound of my shoes on the rungs was deafening. I tried to go quieter, slower, but panic was a fire in my blood. They were right above me. What if they heard? What if they knew about this opening too? Mrs. Gable's voice echoed in my head. He's going to the basement. She knew. She knew this route. This wasn't an escape, it was a chute. A channel designed to funnel me somewhere. My hands were raw. The rust on the ladder was like coarse sandpaper. I descended into the cold and the stink. The darkness a blindfold. I couldn't tear off. How far down was it? The map hadn't shown a scale. 10 feet? 100? The rectangle of light from my bedroom was long gone. There was nothing. Just down. My foot slipped. My chest slammed into a rung, knocking the wind out of me. I gasped, a wet, ragged sound. I froze, listening. Did they hear that? The footsteps above seemed to pause. I held my breath, every muscle screaming. The silence stretched. Then, the footsteps resumed, moving away from the closet, toward the front of my apartment. They were still searching up there. They hadn't found the panel yet. I kept going, faster now. A controlled fall. Down, 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 into the black heart of the building. The shaft narrowed. Pipes, thick and cold, pressed in from the sides, snagging my clothes. I had to turn sideways to squeeze through. This wasn't a maintenance shaft. It was a tomb. Then, a new sound from below. Not my own, a faint clatter. Metal on concrete. It came from somewhere in the blackness ahead. The music box. I had thrown it in before I climbed down. It was a breadcrumb in the dark, a sign I was going the right way. I stopped my descent. My feet found a tangle of pipes that felt solid enough to stand on. I crouched, peering into the void. Hello? The word was a stupid, strangled whisper. It was eaten by the darkness instantly. Something rustled, a soft, dry scraping sound from the direction of the music box. It wasn't an echo. My blood turned to ice. I was not alone down here. I flattened myself against the pipes, trying to make myself smaller, trying to stop breathing. Every horror movie, every ghost story I'd ever heard flooded my brain. Don't call out in the dark. Don't follow the strange noise. I broke both rules in 10 seconds. Then came the voice. It wasn't Mrs. Gable. It wasn't one of the men. It was a whisper, so close it felt like it was right beside my ear, but it came from the darkness ahead. It was her, the girl on the phone. Lon. This way. The whisper was thin, threaded with static, like a bad radio signal. But it was there. I wasn't imagining it. And then I saw it. Around a sharp bend in the tunnel below me, a light bloomed. Not a flashlight. It was a soft, sick, blue glow, with no obvious source. It seeped out from the edges of the tunnel, painting the rusted pipes and weeping concrete walls in its pale, ghostly light. It didn't flicker. It just was. A silent blue invitation. Hope is a liar. I knew that. But what other choice did I have? Go back up to the men tearing my apartment apart? I took a breath and started moving toward the light, crawling now over a wide conduit that served as a floor. That's when the sound started from above. Tink. A sharp, metallic tap. It came from the ceiling of the shaft, far above me. I froze. Listened. Tink, tink, tink. It was rhythmic, methodical. Someone was up there, tapping on the pipes, listening for a change in the echo. They were sounding out the building, hunting for the hollow spaces. Hunting for me. The sound was moving, following the path of the shaft. Following my path. I crawled faster, my knees and hands burning on the rough metal. The blue light ahead was my only goal. A sanctuary. Tink. Tink. Closer now. A voice floated down the shaft, distorted and hollow. Empty here. Then another voice, sharper. The voice of command. The voice of command. Mrs. Gables. Keep checking. The old gas line runs parallel. Tink, tink, clunk. The sound changed. It became a dull, solid thud. They had found the pipe I was on. Here, a man's voice shouted, the sound echoing down to me. I've got it. He's in the old gas line. I didn't need to hear any more. I scrambled, abandoning all pretense of stealth. My breath came in ragged sobs. The blue light was just ahead, spilling out of a square opening. A way out of the pipe. Then a new sound obliterated everything else, a high-pitched, mechanical shriek. A power tool, a saw biting into metal. My metal. The entire pipe vibrated, the shriek running through my bones, through my teeth. They were cutting their way in. Come on, come on, come on, I gasped, clawing my way forward. The opening was right there. I could feel a draft of cold air. The shriek of the saw grew louder, closer. The metal behind me was groaning. I didn't look back. I threw my body forward, tumbling head first out of the pipe. I fell. A short drop, maybe 5 feet. I landed hard on a concrete floor, my shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. Pain shot through me. For a second, the world was a universe of pain and disorientation. The shriek of the saw stopped. I pushed myself up. I was in a room, a large open space. The basement. The blue light was gone. It had vanished the moment I came through the opening. I was back in near total darkness, the only light a few grimy slivers from dirty, ground-level windows high up on one wall. Silence. The men hadn't followed. The saw was quiet. Then I heard it. A different sound. The heavy thump-thump-thump of boots on stairs. Not the main elevator. The service stairs, the ones at the end of the hall. They had blocked the exits and were coming down to meet me. The hunt wasn't over, it had just changed arenas. I had seconds. My eyes darted around the vast, dark space, frantically searching. It was a typical basement. Concrete pillars, exposed pipes running along the ceiling, forgotten junk piled in corners. A sealed-off boiler room, a row of locked storage cages. Nowhere to go, no way out. My gaze fell on a pile in the far corner. A stack of flattened cardboard boxes, a broken chair, and a large, dirty canvas tarp thrown over something lumpy. A hiding place. It was pathetic, but it was all I had. I scrambled toward it, my shoulders screaming in protest. The footsteps from the stairwell were getting closer. A heavy fire door groaned open on the far side of the basement. They were here. I reached the corner and grabbed the edge of the tarp. It was heavy, stiff with age and dirt. I pulled it back. It wasn't a pile of junk. My breath hitched. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. The concrete floor in this corner was different. The rest of the basement was old, dark, stained gray. This was a patch. A rectangle roughly 3 feet by 6. The concrete was newer, lighter in color, poured recently. The surface was mostly smooth, but not perfect. It was a rush job. A grave. But that wasn't the thing that made the air leave my lungs. That wasn't the thing that made my mind shatter. On the surface of the new concrete, scratched into the material while it was still wet, was a single large letter. The lines were crooked, dug with a finger or a stick. It was fresh. It was deliberate. It wasn't an L for land. It was an A. The heavy fire door slammed shut on the other side of the basement. The footsteps started moving across the concrete floor. Slowly, confidently. They were spreading out. Coming for me. And all I could do was stare at that single impossible letter. A tombstone for a ghost I didn't even know. My mind couldn't make the letter go away. A. Scratched into wet cement. A tombstone. The sounds from the far side of the basement, the groan of the fire door, the heavy slam that echoed off the concrete pillars, were distant thunder. My world had shrunk to a 3 by 6 foot patch of floor, a fresh grave, for someone whose name started with A, not L, not Lan. This changes everything. The thought was a flare in the fog of my panic. A new sound. Footsteps, slow, spreading out. They were taking their time. They knew I was here. They knew there was no way out. My survival instinct, buried under a landslide of shock, finally kicked in. I lurched back, letting the heavy tarp fall back over the grave, the canvas hitting the floor with a soft whump that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet. I scrambled backward on my hands and heels, my shoulders screaming, my eyes darting through the gloom. A stack of old metal shelving units stood a few feet away, draped in cobwebs and shadows. It wasn't much. It was everything. I dove behind it, pressing my body against the cold, dusty concrete of the back wall. I pulled my knees to my chest, trying to make myself small, trying to stop breathing. Through the gaps in the shelves, I could see the beams of their flashlights cutting through the dark. 3 of them. 3 cones of white light, sweeping across the floor, painting the pillars, the pipes, the piles of forgotten junk. The light caught the glint of metal in their hands. A tire iron. A long, heavy wrench. Not tools for searching, tools for finishing a job. "Spread out," a voice growled. It wasn't Mrs. Gable. It was low, rough. "He came down the shaft. Can't have gone far." The beams moved methodically. 1 swept left. 1 swept right. The third stayed in the middle, sweeping back and forth. A net of light closing in. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. My breath hitched in my throat. Any second now, one of those beams would fall on the shelving unit. It would pause, the footsteps would stop, and it would be over. I stared at the concrete grave I had just left. The A was burned into my vision. Who was A? Another tenant? The person they thought they were hunting? The person Lon, the real ghost, was trying to avenge? My brain was short-circuiting, trying to solve a puzzle while a firing squad took aim. The beam on the right was getting closer. It slid over a pile of broken furniture, then a rusted water heater. It was 10 feet from me. Then 5. I squeezed my eyes shut. This is it. Flicker. I opened my eyes. The flashlight beams were still there, but something else had happened. High above, the few bare bulbs strung along the ceiling flickered once. Twice. A low, electric hum filled the air. "What the hell was that?" the man on the left muttered. The center beam swung upward, toward the ceiling. "Shitty wiring, what do you think?" Then it happened. It wasn't a flicker. It was an explosion of sound and darkness. Pop, 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 pop. One after another, in a rapid, violent cascade, every single light bulb in the basement burst. A shower of tiny glass fragments rained down onto the concrete floor. The flashlight beams vanished as the men flinched back. The world plunged into a blackness more complete, more absolute than the maintenance shaft. I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. "Jesus Christ!" one of them yelled. "Fuck! My eyes!" another shouted, his voice sharp with pain and surprise. "What was that?" Silence. A thick, ringing silence, broken only by their ragged breathing and the faint tinkle of settling glass. They were blind. I was blind. We were all trapped in the same dark box, but I wasn't the one who made it dark. That was her. Then, the whisper. It was not a memory. It was not in my head. It was a physical presence, a puff of cold air directly against the shell of my right ear. Exit door. They didn't chain it. The voice was thin, a thread of sound in the void. It was her. Lan. I flinched, a full-body shudder, my back grinding against the rough wall. I was more afraid of that whisper than I was of the 3 men with tire irons. Then I felt it. A cold. A deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the basement's temperature. It settled on my left hand. It felt like fingers, impossibly slender and cold, were wrapping around my own. It wasn't a violent grab. It was a firm, insistent pressure. A pull. My mind screamed, "No! Get away! Don't touch me!" But my body, driven by a terror older and deeper than any ghost story, responded to the men fumbling in the dark. "Get your phone out!" the lead voice barked. "Use the light!" The cold fingers squeezed my hand once, a clear signal. Now. Move now. I had no choice. Trust the ghost or wait for the men. I let the invisible hand pull me. I rose from my crouch, my joints screaming. The hand guided me away from the wall, to the right, into the open space between the shelving units. I was moving blind, putting my faith in a dead girl. A click, then a weak glow appeared across the room. A phone's flashlight. Then another. And a third. The beams were weaker now, less focused, darting around wildly as the men tried to get their bearings. "Where is he? I can't see shit." "Over here. Check the storage cages." The hand pulled me forward, faster now. I stumbled over something, my foot catching on a wooden pallet. I didn't fall. The cold grip held me steady, pulling me upright before I could make a sound. We moved like a phantom through the maze of junk. A concrete pillar loomed out of the darkness. The hand guided me around it. A low-hanging pipe threatened to take my head off. The hand pulled me down into a crouch just in time. She knew this place. Every inch of it. This was her home. Her tomb. One of the phone beams swung wildly in our direction. It was going to hit us. There was nowhere to hide. I froze, my muscles locking up. The cold hand pulled harder, insistent. Keep going. The beam of light washed directly over my face. For a heartbeat, the world was white light. I could see the panic in my own wide eyes, reflected in the dusty surface of a metal cabinet. He had me. The man holding the phone was only 20 feet away, looking right at me. Then he shouted, "Over there! I see him, by the boiler room!" The man, the one looking straight at me, turned and ran in the complete opposite direction. His 2 companions, seeing his light move, followed his shout. "Get him!" My jaw hung open. He looked right at me. He saw me. And he ran the other way. She made him see something else. A decoy. A ghost of her own making. The cold fingers were wrapped around my hand, but the real chill was the realization dawning in my gut. She wasn't haunting me, she was saving me. The men weren't hunting a ghost, they were hunting me. And Mrs. Gable, the kind old woman, was their commander. The whole thing, the friendly welcome, the warnings about the empty apartment, all of it. It was a trap. The A on the floor wasn't for a ghost. It was my grave. They were going to kill me and pour the concrete themselves. The cold hand released me. We were standing in front of a door, a solid metal door with a horizontal push bar. The red exit sign above it was dark, its bulbs shattered with the rest. But I knew what it was. Hope, cold and sharp, pierced through the terror. The footsteps and shouts of the men were on the other side of the basement now, crashing around the old boiler room, chasing an illusion. I had maybe 30 seconds. I didn't hesitate. I put my palms flat on the push bar. The metal was cold. I threw my entire body weight into it. The bar gave way with a loud click. The latch retracted. The door swung inward and stopped. It moved maybe an inch, then hit something with a hard, metallic clank. No. I pushed again, grunting, my shoulders screaming. The door wouldn't budge past that single inch. It was held fast by something on the other side. My hope curdled into acid in my stomach. I pressed my face to the narrow opening, my eyes straining to see into the darkness of the stairwell beyond. There was just enough faint light filtering down from a street-level window above, enough to see it. Wrapped around the outside handles, thick, heavy, and dark with rust, a loop of industrial-grade chain. It was held together by a massive brass padlock. They hadn't just blocked the exits, they had sealed the tomb. The shouting from across the basement stopped. The game of chasing shadows was over. A new silence fell, and in that silence I heard a new sound, the slow, deliberate crunch of 3 pairs of work boots, turning and starting back in my direction. They knew where I was. There was nowhere else to go. The silence ended with the scrape of their boots, slow, not searching anymore, coming for me. They knew I was at the door. The only door. The end of the line. My back pressed against the cold steel. The thick chain on the other side was a physical weight on my soul. A final lock on a tomb. My tomb. What had she whispered? They didn't chain it. She was wrong. Or she had tried to get me here before they did. It didn't matter now. Rage, hot and clean, burned through the fog of terror. A new instinct took over. Not fight or flight, just fight. My eyes darted across the filthy concrete floor, lit by the distant, shifting beams of their phone lights. 10 feet away, lying in a pile of construction debris, was a length of rusted iron pipe. Maybe 2 feet long. Caked in dirt but solid. Heavy. I didn't think. I lunged for it. My fingers closed around the cold, rough metal. The weight of it in my hand was a small comfort. It wasn't much. It was everything. I backed up to the door again, planting my feet. I held the pipe like a club, my knuckles white. The beams of light grew stronger, closer. I could hear their breathing now. Let them come. I took a deep, ragged breath, the dust and damp filling my lungs, and screamed into the vast, dark space. My voice was a shredded thing I didn't recognize. "Come on! Come on, you bastards!" The footsteps stopped. 3 shadows resolved out of the gloom, their forms black against the blinding glare of their phones. They fanned out, forming a semicircle. A net. The 2 on the flanks were the men from before. Big guys, broad shoulders, thick arms. The kind of men who worked with their hands. Between them, a step behind, was Mrs. Gable. The sweet old lady from apartment 3B was gone. The woman standing there now wore a smile that didn't touch her eyes. It was a calm, placid expression that made my skin crawl. It was the smile of a butcher looking at a side of beef. The light from the phones threw their shadows up against the pillars and pipes behind them, long, distorted, dancing monsters. "Well now," Mrs. Gable said, her voice echoing slightly in the huge room. It was the same grandmotherly tone she'd used to offer me tea. "There's no need for all that fuss." She took a small step forward, and the men flanking her shifted their weight. "Ready." "You're just like the girl," she continued, tilting her head. That smile never wavered. "So much fight, right up to the end." The girl. The A scratched into the concrete. Anne, the name hit me like a physical blow. The whisper in the shaft. The cold hand that guided me. It was her. They did this to her. "What did you do to her?" I growled, my grip tightening on the pipe. My arm trembled with adrenaline. "We kept the peace, dear," she said, as if explaining the simplest thing in the world. "This building is a family. A quiet, peaceful family. She was a disturbance, just like you." She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod to the man on her right. He was the bigger of the two, the one who had sported the tire iron. Now he held a crowbar, the hooked end pointing at the floor. He started toward me. He wasn't rushing. He was walking like a man approaching a job he'd done 100 times before. The phone in his other hand cast his face in a gruesome uplight, hollowing out his eyes, making his teeth look like a predator's. Each step was a heavy, flat sound on the concrete. Thud. 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 Closer. I was trapped. The door behind me was solid, unmoving. To my left, the other man stood with his wrench, cutting off that escape. To my right, a wall of metal storage cages. The only way out was through them. The big man grunted and raised the crowbar. He was 5 feet away. I could smell the stale beer on his breath. I braced myself, my muscles screaming. He swung. It wasn't a wild swing. It was precise, aimed at my head. I threw myself sideways, my bad shoulder screaming in protest. The air hissed where my face had been. The world exploded in sound, a deafening metallic clang that vibrated through the floor, up my legs and into my jaw. The crowbar had connected with the exit door. The sound was so loud it made me flinch, my eyes squeezing shut for a second. When I opened them, I saw the dent. A deep, concave gash in the thick steel, right at head level. He hadn't been trying to scare me. He hadn't been trying to wound me. That was a killing blow. The sound of it still echoed in the cavernous room, a ringing that wouldn't stop. "We are a community," Mrs. Gable's voice cut through the ringing, calm and serene as a Sunday sermon. The contrast between her voice and the violence was sickening. "We look after our own. We keep things tidy. Anyone who makes a mess, who disturbs the balance, they have to be tidied up too. Tidied up. Like spilled coffee. Like the girl buried under 6 feet of concrete." The man with the crowbar grunted and wrenched his weapon free from the door. He turned, his eyes finding me again. He didn't look angry. He looked annoyed. Like I was a stubborn nail he had failed to drive home on the first strike. The other man, the one with the wrench, took 2 steps to his right, closing the space I had created. They were tightening the circle. I was a rat in a bucket. I held the pipe up in a defensive stance, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. My eyes flicked between the 2 men, crowbar in front, wrench to the side. Mrs. Gable watched from the back, still smiling. They were her dogs, and she had just slipped their leashes. This was it. There was no escape. No ghost was coming to save me this time. The lights were already out. She'd played her card. The man with the wrench made his move. He feinted left, then lunged right, trying to get behind me. At the same time, the big man raised his crowbar again. A coordinated attack. It was over. A new sound entered the world. It wasn't a pop, it wasn't a whisper. It was a low, deep groan, the sound of tortured metal. The man with the wrench stopped his lunge, his head snapping to the side. The big man paused his swing. Even Mrs. Gable's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. All of their flashlight beams swung towards the sound. Next to them, a massive industrial shelving unit, 10 feet tall, 20 feet long, loaded with decades of forgotten junk, was tilting. It moved in what felt like slow motion, leaning away from the wall with an agonizing screech. The second man, the one with the wrench, was standing right beside it. He looked up. His eyes went wide. He opened his mouth to shout, but no sound came out. Then gravity won. With an earth-shattering roar, the entire structure came crashing down. It was an avalanche of steel, splintered wood, and shattered history. Dozens of old paint cans burst on impact, spraying streaks of color through the rising cloud of dust. Sacks of hardened cement mix exploded like bombs. Tools, machine parts, and boxes of files rained down in a chaotic, violent cascade of destruction. The sound was absolute, a grinding, smashing, apocalyptic finale that shook the very foundations of the building. The man with the wrench was gone. simply erased from existence underneath it all. The basement fell silent again, except for the tinkle of a few last falling items and the soft hiss of settling dust. Mrs. Gable and the big man stood frozen, their mouths agape, their flashlights trained on the mountain of wreckage. The air dropped 20 degrees. It wasn't a gradual change. It was instant, like walking into a meat locker. A deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the basement's dampness. My breath plumed in front of my face, and on top of the ruined shelving unit, standing in the churning dust cloud, was a shape. It wasn't human. Not quite. It was a distortion in the air, a silhouette made of cold and rage, the form of a young woman, her hair seeming to float in an unfelt wind. Her features were indistinct, but I could see her eyes. They weren't eyes. They were points of burning, white-hot light, a gaze of pure, focused hatred, directed at the two remaining figures. It was Anne. This wasn't a haunting. This was a war. The moment was a gift. A window. I didn't waste it. I didn't yell. I didn't think. Pure animal instinct took over. I launched myself from the wall, the pipe held in a two-handed grip. The big man was still staring at the apparition, his crowbar held loosely at his side. He heard me at the last second. He started to turn, his face a mask of confusion and fear. He tried to bring the crowbar up. Too late. I swung the pipe with every ounce of strength I had left. It connected with his wrist, the one holding the crowbar. The sound was not the loud clang against the door. It was a wet, sickening crack of bone giving way. He screamed, a high, shrill sound of pure agony that was brutally cut short as I swung again, hitting his shoulder. He went down hard, sprawling on the concrete, the crowbar clattering away into the darkness. He curled into a ball, cradling his shattered arm, whimpering. The fight was over in 5 seconds. I stood there, chest heaving, pipe still raised, slick with something I didn't want to identify. The dust was still thick in the air. The man on the ground was crying. The other was buried. I turned to Mrs. Gable. My blood was on fire. I was ready for her to scream, to run. I wanted her to. She didn't. She stood perfectly still, her flashlight beam now on me. She looked at the man writhing on the floor. She looked at the tomb of shelving. Then her eyes settled on me. The smile was gone. In its place was an expression that chilled me more than the crowbar or the cold. Pity. She looked at me like I was a sick animal that needed to be put down, but one she felt sorry for. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered, her voice laced with a genuine, terrifying sadness. "You can't run, not anymore." She took a slow step backward, away from the light. "You've seen," she said, her voice a little louder, a statement of fact. "You're part of it now." "Part of what?" The question froze on my lips. She gave me one last, sorrowful look. Then she took another step back, into the deep, absolute blackness between the pillars, away from the beams of the dropped phones. She didn't turn. She just retreated, and the darkness swallowed her whole. One moment she was there, a solid shape. The next, she was a memory. Gone. I was alone. Alone with the overwhelming silence, the coppery smell of blood, and the moans of a broken man. The cold air was gone. The presence of the girl had vanished. I was standing over a body, near a grave, holding a weapon, and the door behind me was still, chained, shut. The moaning started again, a low, wet sound from the man on the floor. It cut through the ringing in my ears. He was curled up, a dark shape in the weak light from the dropped phones. My pipe was heavy in my hand, slick with his blood. My own blood, probably. I couldn't tell. I was alone. Mrs. Gable was gone, swallowed by the dark. The ghost, Anne. Her cold rage had evaporated, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the mountain of junk that entombed the other man. The door. The chain. My mind started working again, cutting through the adrenaline. The crowbar. The big man's crowbar. It had clattered away into the darkness when he went down. My eyes scanned the filthy floor, sweeping past the moaning man. There. A glint of steel near the base of a concrete pillar. I didn't hesitate. Every second down here was a second they could regroup. A second for more of them to come. I scrambled for it, my boots slipping on the damp concrete. My fingers closed around the cold, heavy hook of the crowbar. The weight was a promise, a way out. I went to the service door, the one with the dent my face was supposed to make. The chain was thick, the padlock an old, rusty brute. I wedged the chisel end of the crowbar between the hasp and the door frame. I put my shoulder into it, my whole body screaming in protest, and pushed. Metal groaned. Wood splintered. Nothing. "Come on!" I gritted through my teeth. The man on the floor moaned louder, a desperate animal sound. I ignored him. I jammed the crowbar in again, deeper this time, finding a better angle. I threw all my weight on it, a guttural yell tearing from my throat. Crack! Not the chain. The wood of the door frame. It splintered, chunks falling to the floor. The hasp, held by 2 long screws, was now hanging on by a thread. One more. I braced myself, took a breath that tasted of blood and dust, and heaved. The old wood gave way with a final shrieking tear. The hasp ripped free. The chain fell loose, hitting the concrete with a heavy clatter that echoed through the basement. Freedom. I shoved the door. It swung open onto a narrow, black alleyway smelling of garbage and rain. I didn't look back at the moaning man. I didn't look at the grave of steel and shattered paint cans. I just ran. My lungs burned, my legs were lead, but I ran. I ran down the alley, burst out onto a deserted side street, and kept going. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran from the building, from the quiet street, from the smiling old woman and the weight of the dead. I ran until the black sky began to pale into a bruised purple, until the first delivery trucks started their routes, until the sounds of the city returning to life began to drown out the silence of the basement. The police precinct was sterile and smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed, a sound that felt loud after the dead quiet of my apartment. I was a mess. My shirt was torn, my knuckles raw and bloody. There was a long scratch down my face I didn't remember getting. The desk sergeant, a thick man with a bored face, looked me up and down like I was something he'd have to scrape off his shoe. "Take a seat," he'd grunted, pointing to a row of hard plastic chairs. Now I was in a small, windowless room, an interview room. The table between us was scarred with initials. The man across from me was older, maybe late 50s, with graying hair and a calm expression. His name tag read Officer Miller. He had a kind face. It made me want to trust him. "Okay, son," he said, his voice soft. "Start from the beginning. Take your time." So I told him. Everything. The move, the strange noises, the whispering through the vents. The gifts left at my door. The music box. And my neighbor who didn't exist. The gaslighting, the feeling of going crazy. I told him about the other residents, their dead eyes, the way they all said apartment 203 was empty. I told him about Mrs. Gable, how she seemed so sweet. I told him about the basement, the 2 men, the crowbar, the wrench, the shelf collapsing, the girl, the cold presence I was sure had saved me. My voice was raw. I sounded unhinged. I knew it. But I had to make him believe. "They killed her," I whispered, my voice cracking. "The girl from 203. Her name was Anne. They buried her in the basement. They were going to do the same to me." I fumbled for my phone. The screen was cracked, but it turned on. I pulled up the video. The shaky footage of the music box playing on its own. I pushed it across the table. "Here. And the box itself, it's in my apartment. On the kitchen counter. Proof." It was her gift. Officer Miller watched the short clip without a change in expression. He slid the phone back to me. He steepled his fingers, looking at me with those calm, steady eyes. It was the first time I felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't looking at me like I was crazy. He was listening. "And Mrs. Gable," he said, his voice even. "You said she's from apartment 3B? "Yes," I said, leaning forward. "She's the ringleader. She has to be. She smiled while they were trying to kill me." The image made me shudder. "Okay," he said, nodding slowly. "Okay, Nate." He used my name. It felt real. "You did the right thing coming to us." This is a very serious allegation. He stood up. I'm going to have a car sent to your building right now. 2 officers. They'll check out the basement, talk to this Mrs. Gable. We'll get to the bottom of it. I want you to sit tight. I'm going to get you a glass of water. Can you write down the names of the other residents you spoke to? Anyone you can remember. Thank you, I breathed. The relief was so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. Thank you. He gave me a small, reassuring smile and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. I was safe. It was over. I sank back into the hard chair, the tension finally draining out of me, leaving me feeling hollowed out and exhausted. I was safe. Time passed. I don't know how much. 5 minutes? An hour? The silence of the small room started to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a box. I drank the water Miller had brought back. I stared at the scarred tabletop. I listened to the hum of the lights. Waited. On a small shelf in the corner of the room, a television was mounted, its volume turned down low. It was playing a local news channel. Muted talking heads, weather maps, traffic reports. I watched it just to have something to look at. A new segment started. A reporter standing on a leafy, sunlit street. My street. I sat up straighter, my heart giving a little kick. The reporter was talking to an older woman with neatly coiffed white hair. She was talking about neighborhood safety, about the importance of community. It was Mrs. Gable. My blood ran cold. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see her placid, grandmotherly expression as she spoke to the camera. She looked like a pillar of the community. Then the chyron appeared at the bottom of the screen. A white banner with blue text. Margaret Gable, West Side Neighborhood Watch Captain. My breath caught in my throat. Neighborhood Watch Captain. The door opened. Officer Miller came back in. He closed the door behind him. The reassuring smile was gone. His face was a blank professional mask. He moved with a new kind of purpose, slower, heavier. We checked it out, Nate, he said. His voice was different now. The softness was gone. It was flat, official. The basement? I asked. My own voice, a dry croak. We sent a patrol car. Officers went through the entire sub-level. It's clean. Clean? What do you mean clean? There's a man down there with a broken arm. Another one is, he's under the shelf. There's no one down there, son, he said, his eyes not meeting mine. He was looking at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. There's no collapsed shelving unit. The service door you mentioned. The lock is intact. No sign of forced entry. No, I whispered. It wasn't possible. They cleaned it up. Of course they did. They had time. You have to dig. The concrete. And he took a step closer, and for the first time I felt a prickle of fear. Not the frantic terror from the basement. This was a different kind of fear. A cold, sinking dread. He put a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy. Too heavy. The patrolman spoke with Mrs. Gable, he continued, his voice dropping a little, becoming almost confidential. She's a very respected woman in that community. Been the neighborhood watch captain for 12 years. She said she's never seen you before. Said apartment 201 has been empty for a month. Waiting for the new tenant to move in at the end of the week. My mind just stopped working. The words were English, but they didn't make a language I could understand. Empty. Never seen me. No, I said, shaking my head. No, she's lying. They're all lying. My stuff is in the apartment. My key. The music box. We have the building supervisor let our men into 201, Miller said. It's empty, Nate. Completely empty. Fresh coat of paint. No furniture, no clothes, no music box. He squeezed my shoulder. Are you sure you haven't been under a lot of stress lately? Sometimes, when we're stressed. He leaned in closer, and he smiled. It wasn't the reassuring smile from before. It was a calm, placid expression that didn't touch his eyes. It was the smile of a butcher looking at a side of beef. It was the exact same smile Mrs. Gable had worn in the basement, just before she sent her men to kill me. We just want to help you, he said. The world went white at the edges. They say you get used to the quiet. You don't. You just learn to fill it with the noise inside your own head. Months. I don't know how many. The days here bleed into one another. White walls, soft shoes, pills in a paper cup. They tell me I had a psychotic break. A fugue state brought on by stress. They say I was found wandering downtown, dehydrated and incoherent. They say the building, the apartment, all of it was a delusion. They have paperwork that says so. I don't argue anymore. I take the pills. I eat the bland food. I sit in the common room and watch the television bolted to the wall. Today, it's a show about real estate. City Living, it's called. A perky host shows off apartments to hopeful buyers and renters. And then I see it. The facade. The brickwork. My building. My heart starts a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. The host is walking through an apartment. My apartment. 201. And with newly refinished floors and a fresh coat of paint, this one bedroom is perfect for the young professional looking for a quiet retreat in the city, she chirps. A young man stands with her. He looks like me. Maybe a few years younger. He has that same look in his eye, eager, a little lonely, hopeful for a new start. He's nodding, smiling. He agrees to take it. He signs the forms on a tablet held by the rental agent. The show is wrapping up. The new tenant is standing in his doorway, holding his new keys. Just then, a door across the hall opens. Mrs. Gable steps out. She's holding a plate of cookies wrapped in cellophane. She's got her warm, grandmotherly smile on. "Oh, hello," she says, her voice as sweet as honey. The sound, even through the tinny TV speakers, makes every muscle in my body tighten. "You must be our new neighbor. I'm Margaret from 3B. We are so glad to have you." "Nice to meet you," the young man says, reaching out to shake her hand. "I'm Adam. Welcome to the family, Adam," she says, handing him the cookies. "We're a very quiet, peaceful family here. We all look out for one another." She takes a small step back, her role in the TV segment complete. The camera stays on the new tenant's happy face for a moment, but just before the shot cuts away, Mrs. Gable, standing in the background, shifts her gaze. Her eyes look past the young man, past the camera crew. They look directly through the screen, through the common room, and find me. She holds my gaze. The placid, neighborly smile is still on her lips. And then she winks.